the summer of 1942, there had been growing concern about Mexican-American youth crime. When the Sleepy Lagoon case broke, when Jose Diaz's body was found, it came at exactly the right moment for the hysteria to erupt.
In the 1940s, one Mexican-American kid killing another didn't attract much interest from authorities. But in wartime Los Angeles, Jose Diaz's murder would play out differently. The police department stormed the city's Mexican-American community. Hank Levas was the main suspect. The arrest and trial of Levas and others from the 38th Street neighborhood raised fears that Mexican youth were out of control. Within months, the city would be gripped by brutal racial rioting. Mexican Americans would point to the riots of 1943 as the darkest days of their long history in the City of the Angels. In 1942, the mood in the City of the Angels was eerie. The country was at war. On the streets, the talk was of spies and traitors. Suspicions swirled around young Mexican Americans. Fears abounded that rebellious kids were being manipulated by enemy agents.
In the local papers, you saw often columns right next to each other. Japan is doing this, and our local threat is these Mexican-American youth.
Less than 100 years before, Los Angeles belonged to Mexico. Business was conducted in Spanish, and streets had names like Trinidad and Chapule. But by 1942, Nuestra Señora de Los Ángeles was now simply Los Angeles. And more than just the name of the city had changed. Chapule became Pearl Street, and Eternidad became Broadway. As Los Angeles grew, Mexican Americans came to be viewed as foreigners in a city established by their ancestors. Within 48 hours of Jose Diaz's murder, 600 young Mexican Americans were caught in a dragnet.
They picked up everybody that was over 12 and up to 25. And you couldn't walk out in the street because they would take you. So the word went on in the neighborhood, they're picking up everybody. And it's about a fight, and it's about somebody got killed. Then the parents would go to the other parent and tell them, look, they're doing this and that, keep the kids in the house. We were just peeking out the windows, and police were all over the streets.
The police did regularly harass Mexican kids on the street because they thought of them as being the criminal element. If the kid looked suspicious, they would pick them up. If the kid looked sullen or didn't give proper respect, the kid could get beat up by the police. There are a number of instances in which Mexican kids said, you know, if you're on the street after 8 o'clock, just be careful. You got to get off the streets.
Hank Levas was no stranger to the LAPD. Levas was routinely picked up by police when the suspect of a crime was ambiguously described as an unknown Mexican.
From the perspective of the LAPD, Henry was a delinquent with a chip on his shoulder. largely because he was the kind of kid who would stand up for his rights. He would protest assaults upon him. He would protest if he was arrested, for example. He would challenge them.
By the summer of 1942, his life seemed headed in a new direction. He had enlisted in the Merchant Marine, even been issued a uniform. But now, he was a suspect in the murder of Jose Diaz.
As soon as we pulled up, my mother started to get off the car and the police surrounded the car and they arrested my brother. I asked him, where are you taking him? And he said to the 77th police station.
Decades of discrimination had forced the Mexican-American community to turn inward. By the 1940s, LA's 250,000 Mexican-Americans lived in a series of tight-knit neighborhoods called barrios. The communities were traditional, conservative, and self-contained. But like many Mexican-Americans of his generation, Hank Levas refused to accept the confines of the barrio. There was a different America outside their neighborhood, and Hank and others like him wanted to claim a piece for themselves.
The tensions that arose from this sort of splitting of culture is that often parents really saw their children disappearing from them, from the sanctity of the barrio, from the cultural world. Even though physically they remained, they more often were the people that would venture into various aspects of American culture.
These kids spoke to each other in English, and it was an English that was punctuated by jazz phrases, cool, hip, on time. All of these kinds of things that they very clearly drew from jazz culture during this period. And some of the boys from 38th Street will tell you they didn't know Spanish during this time. They didn't speak Spanish.
The wartime economy put money in the kids' pockets. In 1942, they were spending it on big balloon pants, pegged at the ankle, and long, baggy coats, a style borrowed from African Americans. It was called the Zoot suit. The Zoot suit was everywhere. In the nightclubs, kids in Zoot suits ruled the dance floor. Their stoic moves, the essence of LA cool.
All he do is get the girl's arm like that, and she go around him, and he put his arm out this way, and then she go around about 3 times, and he go like that, because that guy was not going to move. He didn't want to wrinkle the coat or nothing. He didn't want to mess up his pants.
As soon as they would get out of the house, they would beeline straight down to Central Avenue. A lot of jazz clubs were, and they would go there to listen to jazz artists and to dance the swing, and all of these things that their Mexican parents would probably not have approved of, and they found ways of sneaking around that. And in fact, wearing the Zoot suit, I would say, was part of that.
Many times I wore my skirt just above my knee till I got around the corner, and then I'd roll it up at the waist. And so that it'd be really short, you know. Then coming back from school, we'd just pull them down. The boys wore their pants very wide at the knee. They were always to be 40 inches at the knees and 10 to 11 inches at the cuff. So they were very ballooned out, very high-waisted.
Their outrageous clothes and cocky attitudes shocked their traditional parents, who feared their sons and daughters were becoming pachucos.
In Los Angeles in the early 40s, the word pachuco meant punk. These were ill-mannered kids. These weren't the kids that you wanted your children to hang out with.
Many white Los Angelinos felt threatened by their assertive presence. To them, any Mexican kid in a zoot suit was a potential pachuco.
By wearing their zoot suits and swaggering down the streets in public, these kids defied the norms of segregation. It's hard for us to imagine, but to go back in the context of the 1940s, when everything around you told you, you're not one of us, you're not American, and because you're not American, because you're not white, you're supposed to remain in your neighborhoods, you can't go to our clubs, you can't go to our restaurants, you can't go to our movies, and on and on and on. And of course that's going to breed some sort of resentment.
The tension on LA's streets was heightened by the presence of 50,000 sailors looking for a way to let off steam before heading off to war.
Tensions between servicemen and Mexican-American boys, I think, came from a lot of different places. The first place to look is in terms of the servicemen's own backgrounds. A lot of these servicemen were coming from other parts of the United States. They were not familiar with Mexican Americans, and they really were not accustomed to not only the diversity of Los Angeles, but the kind of interaction one would see on the city streets.
The charged atmosphere sparked frequent street battles between sailors from the Naval Armory and Mexican-American boys from the surrounding community called Chavez Ravine.
Many of the Mexican-American kids during this period came to terms with segregation by seeing their neighborhoods as their neighborhoods. They resented the presence of whites, particularly if you can imagine white military personnel during this period pumped up by boot camp, ready to go out and lick the Japs and lick the Nazis.
The sailors making their way back from a night on the town had no alternative but to cut through a mostly Mexican-American neighborhood.
Going down that canyon from the armory, Mexican kids would sit up on the side of the hill as we were walking them down the road there. You never wanted to get caught by yourself as a sailor in that area by going through there in one single file. You're asking for trouble. You're really asking for trouble.
At the base, they told us to go down to the sale shop, and they sewed 13 pennies in the back of our neckerchief, that if any of the Pachucos came after you, you take that neckerchief off and use it as a billy club. 13 pennies give you quite a blow. And we all had that.
Each fight provided an excuse for the next. Sailors insulted Mexican-American teenagers, and they in turn taunted the sailors. The police had their own problems with LA's Mexican youth.
During the war years, the LAPD felt frustrated. They were losing their best and most experienced police officers to go off into the Army and the Navy, into the service. And in addition to that, they were faced with this new phenomena of the Zoot suiters. You don't know how many times you heard they were going to take their kid gloves off and they were going to deal with the Zoot suiters harshly now. That they wanted to really step forward and deal with what they saw as this criminal element in a very harsh manner.
Inside the interrogation room of the 77th Precinct, Hank Levas could not have imagined what was in store for him. The Sleepy Lagoon case was playing out like a Hollywood movie. Hank was the villain. The ending to this story would surprise everyone. The arrest of Levas and 21 other boys made front-page news. Hank and his friends did admit to engaging in a fight, but they denied killing Jose Diaz. They stuck to their story despite tough treatment by the police.
They put gloves on so they won't mark their hands up, you know, and just whip you, just hit you all over, the body, the face, and everything. And the leg, kick you in the legs, yeah. And they were trying to get a confession.
We got to the police station, and I went up to the counter, and I asked if we could see my brother Hank, that he had just been picked up, and what could we do? And the officer said, he looked it up, and he said, oh yeah, he says, he's the leader. And I said, well, I'm not sure that you got the right person if you're calling him a leader. He said, no, we know who you want. He said, you want to see Hank. And they opened the door, and I saw my brother, but I didn't even recognize him. They had him handcuffed. His hands were behind the chairs. He had his head down, his lip was hanging out below his chin. And I called to him, but he didn't lift his head up. He was knocked out. And he said, well, now you've seen him.
Hank claimed that one of the cops who beat him was Chief Clem Peoples. The chief was the lead investigator on the Sleepy Lagoon case. When the largest mass trial in California history began in October of 1942, Peoples was there, building a case against Hank and the boys in the courtroom, and writing articles about Sleepy Lagoon in the pulp press. Presiding over the case was the Honorable Charles Fricke, a well-respected judge known as a law and order man.
Dad used to talk about Fricke as a prosecutor's judge. Judge Fricke, according to my father, would take his prosecutors aside over lunch hour and educate them on how to introduce evidence. He prided himself in knowing criminal law better than anybody. I think my father felt that he thought of himself as infallible and tended to look down at counsel and look down at people that he didn't agree with.
Overruling objections from the defense, Judge Fricke sat all the defendants together, isolating them from their lawyers. Since their arrest, the defendants had not been allowed to get haircuts or clean clothes. Defense attorneys requested that the defendants be permitted to clean up. Their request was denied. The judge ruled that the boys' appearance was relevant to the case.
That's the way they are. That's the way they have to be out here. He said they wear long ducktail hair, and we're not allowing them to take haircuts, so nothing was allowed. And so naturally they looked really bad.
The jury was looking at the defendants who sat in 2 rows of seats opposite them, and their dislike of the defendants was palpable. They did not like those people they were looking at.
Hank and the other boys looked like vagabonds, said one observer.
They were no longer those young men that took their pride in their clothes. They didn't have that.
Only Hank Levas grasped the significance of the trial. His conviction would send a message that the city had Mexican youth crime under control.
My brother Hank knew that he was going to be the one that they were going to zero in on. He was very aware of what was happening.
Hank was cast as the villain because both in personality and size, he was like larger than the others.
The prosecution painted a picture of the 38th Street group as ruthless killers, with Hank as their leader. When the 38th Street kids took the stand, they told a different story. They said they were driving around that night looking for the boys who had attacked Hank and his girlfriend earlier that evening.
To dance where gypsies play and let our hearts go sway down in that dim cafe.
As they approached the party, two of the girls found Jose Diaz lying in the shadows. He had been beaten and stabbed.
Blood is streaming down from both sides of his face. There's blood coming also out of his mouth. He's breathing quite shallow. And this is when they find him, already unconscious, before the fight breaks out.
As the girls attended to Jose, Hank and his friends went on the attack. When the brief fight broke up, the girls helping Jose were pulled away. One of the boys spotted Diaz on the ground and hit him. The defendants admitted that one of their group had struck Diaz, but under oath, they denied any responsibility for his death.
Darling, I love you so. That's my desire.
Though never charged in connection with the murder, the girls from 38th Street were portrayed in the press as every bit as dangerous as the boys.
It was plastered all over the papers that girls took part in this murderous foray the night that Jose Diaz was killed. And that was a huge part of the story, that women were actually on the streets fighting with boys.
8 girls were called to testify by the prosecution. One after another, they refused to cooperate. One of them was Lorena Encinas. She knew who killed Jose Diaz, but she would not reveal her secret. The trial dragged on for 3 months. Hank Levas's mother remained hopeful throughout the process.
My mother always thought that because her son was not guilty, that no matter what they do, at the end they're going to be released because they didn't have anything to do with the killing.
On January 12, 1943, the jury announced its verdict.
When the jury came in and the verdict was read, the expression on the faces of the defendants were of horror.
When the mothers were all huddled together there, and I was there with them. Most of them didn't speak English. There was, I think, only 2 that spoke English. So we were quickly trying to translate to them what had happened.
17 defendants were found guilty. Hank Levas was sentenced to life.
Hank, I kind of expected that they would be found guilty. And he picked his head up. Well, a lot of them just dropped their head down and looking to the floor, but he just picked his head up, and like he knew this was coming. My brother Hank knew it was going to come.
Some of the guys were in tears, you know. And me and Hank Lay was telling him, buckle up, you suckers, you, man. Be a man, stop crying, you know. And we were hurting too, you know, but we weren't trying to show it. We were trying to be machos, you know, and all that. But a lot of guys were crying.
The boys were sent to San Quentin Prison, 400 miles from home. They weren't the only ones who would do time. The girls from 38th Street were taken from their families and made wards of the state. In a legal process that provided neither jury nor trial, they were sent away to an infamous reform school.
The Ventura School for Girls at this time is really a very repressive institution. One that's custodial and disciplinary procedures completely rival the state prisons of the time. Young women would go to very drastic measures in order to escape going to the Ventura School for Girls because of its bad reputation. There were women at the juvenile hall who knew that they were going to be ultimately sentenced to the Ventura School, and they were swallowing safety pins the night before in order to get out of it.
With the secret she held, Lorena Encinas could have made a deal. But she refused.
My mother's reason for being there was for the mere reason that she failed to cooperate with the courts and divulge the information that they wanted her to name all the names of the people involved.
During all the time she served at Ventura, Lorena kept details about Jose Diaz's murder to herself. While the 38th Street boys did time in San Quentin, prominent Los Angelinos were working to get them released. Believing the boys had been railroaded, communists, intellectuals, and Hollywood celebrities like Orson Welles and Rita Hayworth lent their names to the newly formed Sleepy Lagoon Defense Committee.
I went to the Beverly Hills Hotel. They said I had to go speak. She says, bring some clothes, we'll pick you up. Well, I went as I dressed with my knee-high white socks and my very short black skirt. They picked me up and we went to Rita Hayworth's house. And Rita Hayworth said, no, you can't wear that. You could get one of my dresses. And my first formal belonged to Rita Hayworth.
Political activists also joined the cause.
We had professional people, we had educators, we had congressmen, we had a lot of union people.
The committee's efforts to portray the defendants as innocent victims paid off. Money to fund an appeal came in from across the country. Prominent members of the committee visited the boys to reassure them they would not be forgotten.
And Anthony Quinn told us, don't worry, we're going to beat this on appeal. Yeah. You were railroaded. And she says, I'm behind you guys.
In the months following the trial, the city grew more tense. Skirmishes between sailors and Zoot suiters became a daily occurrence.
The Pachucos would intimidate people. They would walk down the street 5 abreast, and if you walked around them, they would laugh or stick their hand out and hit you. After a while, you got so you'd go down the side streets instead of confronting them. A lot of them were from Mexico. They didn't speak English. They didn't adhere to our laws. They weren't even geared up for the war effort.
On June 3rd, 1943, the city exploded.
As a group of service personnel were passing a group of civilian youth, one young man raised his hand in a manner that one of the sailors thought was threatening. One of the sailors turned around and grabbed the arm of the young civilian, and from that point, the fight broke out. It seemed that both sides were primed for confrontation, and the street seemed to explode in a fight. In the process, The sailor had his jaw broken, he was knocked unconscious, and his buddies were had to drag him back to the armory.
Later that night, a group of sailors armed with belts and clubs left the naval armory and headed downtown. The Zoot Suit riots had begun.
We had a commanding officer, and he told the guys, he said, "Okay, man," he said, "we've had it." So the guys from the army, they got up the gun belts and wrapped them around their hands, and down they went, cleaned up town.
I was in the theater downtown and watching a movie. All of a sudden the lights went on. And you hear a lot of noise, commotion, a lot of guys yelling or something. Man, you turn around and you see these servicemen beating the heck out of all these Mexicans.
And there was a fight not just with fisticuffs, but some of them had chains. So what I did is I dived underneath the counter and stayed there and, you know, protected myself because it became very wild. It was like a movie set.
Among the victims in the theater were 12 and 13-year-old boys beaten by American servicemen because of the clothes they wore.
And a lot of them came back happy. A lot of the guys, the Americans, they came back happy.
The following night, hundreds of sailors took the fight beyond downtown and into the heart of LA's oldest Mexican neighborhood.
The servicemen would cross the river and head into communities like Boyle Heights and then other parts of East Los Angeles to seek out Mexican-American youth that were no longer ending up in downtown Los Angeles at theaters and bars. So as the riot played itself out, there had to be a lot more sort of search and destroy, to use a military metaphor. And that's where you get the real movement into East Los Angeles.
Once in the barrio, sailors broadened their attack beyond Mexican boys in zoot suits. Any Mexican in their path was a potential target.
The way the riots develop is very much attached to what the notion of a Zoot Suiter was. The notion of a Zoot Suiter was always racialized, even though Mexicans were not the only people wearing Zoot suits. So a riot that first was aiming at individuals because of their dress becomes a more expansive sort of riot aimed at a particular racial population, Mexican Americans.
It didn't take long for the kids from the barrios to organize and fight back.
There was an alley behind this theater and a lot right next to it. And it was just jammed. And so we was waiting. It was already getting dark. So then about 30 guys come out the street so that when the sailors come, they could see them. And as soon as they went out there, here comes those truckloads. Truckloads of sailors and civilians. And they let out a cry, there they are, and they came in. Well, as they came in, once they got all the way in, we all came out. I myself had a bat, and I used it. And there was people hurt on both sides.
We were fisticuffing and, you know, and kicking and biting and scratching, and I got a couple of good blows. Knocked me down. They took me back to the base and put me in sick bay overnight. The next morning, I went back to doing my normal duties, but I had two good shiners.
At nighttime they came. At nighttime, right? At nighttime they came. Oh, so we just disappeared, right? Disappeared. But we found out that the best thing to do to get even with them is watch them on Whittier Boulevard. And when there was 4 or 5 guys riding in a car, and we would follow them until they had to come a boulevard stop, and there'd be another car in front of them. We'd run out there, open one door, and start pounding the hell out the driver's door and get him out, and then beat the hell out of the guy, right?
On the 5th day of the riots, 5,000 civilians showed up to assist the sailors.
brother was only 14 years old. I was 16 at the time, but I did drive. And we got my mother's car, and we went to El Toro and picked up Marines. Los Angeles was like a war zone, and we had to do something about it. The Pachucos had just taken over. I felt that I was doing my share for the war effort.
The kids fighting the sailors were not entirely on their own.
There's this man I never knew, I never seen him before. And he says, "Are you guys coming to fight sailors?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I have a car here. It's full of gas, and at that time the gas was rationed. Take it, use it. When you get through, just leave the keys in it, put it any place on Central Avenue, and I'll pick it up." And he says, "All I want you to do is get one of them white guys for me."
By week's end, the Zoot Suit riots were making headlines across the country. Thousands of Marines, soldiers, and sailors from as far away as Las Vegas arrived in the City of the Angels, hitching to clean up the town. Mexican-American kids were overwhelmed. In a ritual repeated across the city, servicemen stripped them of their clothes and burnt the garments on the streets.
The LAPD hangs back during this entire confrontation, about a week of rioting, never taking the offensive in trying to stop the riot, and only showing up after the rioting servicemen have swept through an area. And they show up only to arrest the victims of riot and throw them into jail.
The shore patrol would naturally come out right away because they were patrolling like regular policemen. And they'd come to break up a fight. And they'd take these Pachucos, if they could catch them, if they didn't run away, you know, they'd catch them and throw them in the Jeep and put them in the paddy wagon and take them to jail. With the sailors, they'd put us in a Jeep, take us a couple of blocks away and tell us to get back to our ship or get back to the station.
None of the sailors who got arrested. You tell me one of the sailors that got arrested for beating the hell out of somebody. Huh?
Within 4 or 5 days, LA officials realized this could move us out of control in a wartime society. It could, in fact, lead to much greater problems if servicemen kept disobeying their superiors and going down into these communities. And that's why it stops.
On June 8, 1943, military authorities, in consultation with civic leaders, declared the city off limits to servicemen. The rioting ended soon afterwards. The following day, the city council adopted a resolution banning the wearing of zoot suits on LA streets. Wearing the suit in public was punishable by a 30-day jail term. Stores that sold the suits quickly moved to distance themselves from the style that had become a symbol of rebellion.
Mexican-American youth, I think, were taught in World War II that they could not simply choose by themselves the way that they would express themselves. They simply couldn't choose what they could wear. They simply couldn't choose who they could be. That this was not a society that allowed for that kind of freedom of expression for these particular youth. And that's a very painful lesson. It's a very painful lesson when one hears the rhetoric of Americans all, the rhetoric of American promise open to all sorts of immigrants, all sorts of people.
As the riot subsided, the governor ordered the creation of a citizens committee. Its charge was to investigate and determine the cause of the riots. Ironically, prison life had sheltered the 38th Street Boys from the worst mob violence in Los Angeles history. With Hollywood stars still working on their behalf, the kids got special treatment.
We used to have what the guards used to eat, their food, not prison food, their food. You know, steaks, pork chops, milk, ice cream, cake, everything.
Unlike the other boys, Hank Leyvas refused to play along. His resistance to authority earned him a stint at California's dreaded Folsom Prison. The locking of the doors, he wrote, left him with a lonesome, empty feeling. You are standing up to the iron door, waiting for the guard to come along and take the count. Listening as his footsteps fade away in the distance, you realize that you are alone. As the months passed, Leyvas grew increasingly resentful. Finally, in November of 1943, defense attorneys filed an appeal with the California 2nd District Court, claiming their clients had been denied a fair trial. A year passed before a decision was handed down. By this time, Hank and the others had been locked up for more than 2 years.
I sent a telegram to San Quentin, care of Henry Leyvas, to tell all the guys, saying, appeal successful. I forgot what else it said, but I know that it ended, oh, what a wonderful morning.
We couldn't believe it at first, you know what I mean? Like, it was like a shock. And one of the guys told me, he says, you know, this guy got a barrel of homemade brew buried in the ground. And we felt like celebrating, you know. So we dug it up, and we got drunk that night in the barracks over there. And the officers came, you know, well, they weren't officers, they were like supervisors. And the head guy, the warden, told them, as long as they don't fight nobody, you know, don't cause no problem, leave them alone. Leave them alone, you know. And we drank that whole barrel, yeah.
In October of 1944, Hank Leyvas and the other boys were set free. Ever defiant, Hank Leyvas walked out of the Los Angeles Hall of Justice wearing a Zoot suit. The court ruled that Judge Fricke had committed serious errors in the trial and threw out the verdict. But the court did not clear the 38th Street Boys of the murder charge. Although LA authorities declined to retry the case, the Sleepy Lagoon murder haunted Hank and the others for life.
It stopped him from going into service, which is the thing that he wanted so bad. He'd already signed into the Merchant Marine. He'd already had a trial run, and he was in uniform, and it didn't happen. All this happened, and it just broke his future.
Jose Diaz was dead, and his killer got away with murder. Those who had information weren't talking in 1942.
My mom did know who the murderer of Jose Diaz was, but she kept it to herself. And she refused to cooperate with the authorities.
Decades passed before the truth emerged. Toward the end of her life, Lorena Encinas at last shared her secret about Sleepy Lagoon.
My mother admitted to me that the reason that she kept that secret from the authorities was that it was her brother, Louis, who was involved in the murder. She kept it to herself because she was not the type of person that would snitch, so to speak, on anyone else. And she also was trying to protect my Uncle Louis.
Lorena claimed that her brother Louis was at the party before the 38th Street kids arrived, but had been thrown out for causing problems. Later that night, as Jose Diaz and two companions left the party, they were met by an angry Louis Encinas and his friends. In the fight that followed, Jose Diaz was stabbed and left to die.
New Spain established a permanent settlement in what is now downtown Los Angeles, as instructed by Spanish Governor of Las Californias Felipe de Neve and authorized by Viceroy Antonio María de Bucareli. After sovereignty changed from Mexico to the U.S. in 1848, great changes came from the completion of the Santa Fe Railroad line from Chicago to Los Angeles in 1885. Overlanders flooded in, mostly white Protestants from the lower Midwest and South. Los Angeles had a strong economic base in farming, oil, tourism, real estate and movies. It grew rapidly with many suburban areas inside and outside the city limits. Its motion picture industry made the city world famous, and World War II brought new industry, especially high-tech aircraft construction. Politically, the city was moderately conservative, with a weak labor union sector. Since the 1960s, growth has slowed, and traffic delays have become infamous. Los Angeles was a pioneer in freeway development as the public transit system deteriorated. New arrivals, especially from Mexico and Asia, have transformed the demographic base since the 1960s. Old industries have declined, including farming, oil, military and aircraft, but tourism, entertainment and high-tech remain strong. Early times by 3000 BC, the area was occupied by the Hokan-speaking people of the Millingstone period who fished, hunted sea mammals, and gathered wild seeds. They were later replaced by migrants, possibly fleeing drought in the Great Basin, who spoke a Uto-Aztecan language called Tongva. The Tongva people called the Los Angeles region Yaa in that tongue. By the 1700s AD, there were 250,000 to 300,000 native people in California and 5,000 in the Los Angeles basin. The land occupied and used by the Tongva covered about 4,000 square miles. It included the enormous floodplain drained by the Los Angeles and San Gabriel rivers in the southern Channel Islands, including the Santa Barbara, San Clemente, Santa Catalina, and San Nicolas Islands. They were part of a sophisticated group of trading partners that included the Chumash to the west, the Cahuilla and Mojave to the east, and the Juaneños and Luiseños to the south. Their trade extended to the Colorado River and included slavery. The lives of the Tongva were governed by a set of religious and cultural practices that included belief in creative supernatural forces. They worshipped Chinig Chinoks, a creator god, and Chukit, a female virgin god. Their great mourning ceremony was based on a belief in the afterlife. In a purification ritual, they drank tolguachi, a hallucinogenic made from Jimson weed and salt water. Their language was called Kij or Ki, and they practiced cremation. Generations before the arrival of the Europeans, the Tongva had identified and lived in the best sites for human occupation. The survival and success of Los Angeles depended greatly on the presence of a nearby and prosperous Tongva village called Yanga. Its residents provided the colonists with seafood, fish, bowls, pelts, and baskets. For pay, they dug ditches, hauled water, and provided domestic help. They often intermarried with the Mexican colonists. Spanish era, 1769 to 1821 and 1542 and 1602. The first Europeans to visit the region were Captain Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo and Captain Sebastián Vizcaíno. The first permanent non-native presence began when the Portola expedition arrived on August 2, 1769. Plans for the pueblo. Although Los Angeles was a town that was founded by Mexican families from Sonora, it was the Spanish governor of California who named the settlement. In 1777, Governor Felipe de Neve toured Alta California and decided to establish civic pueblos for the support of the military presidios. The new pueblos reduced the secular power of the missions by reducing the dependency of the military on them. At the same time, they promoted the development of industry and agriculture. Governor de Neve identified Santa Barbara, San Jose, and Los Angeles as sites for his new pueblos. His plans for them closely followed a set of Spanish city planning laws contained in the Laws of the Indies promulgated by King Philip II in 1573. Those laws were responsible for laying the foundations of the largest cities in the region at the time, including Los Angeles, San Francisco, Tucson, San Antonio, Sonoma, Monterrey, Santa Fe, and Laredo. The Spanish system called for an open central plaza, surrounded by a fortified church, administrative buildings, and streets laid out in a grid, defining rectangles of limited size to be used for farming and residences. It was in accordance with such precise planning, specified in the Law of the Indies, that Governor de Neve founded the Pueblo of San José de Guadalupe, California's first municipality, on the Great Plain of Santa Clara on 29 November 1777. Pobladores. The Pobladores is the name given to the 22 adults and 22 children from Sonora who founded Los Angeles. 20 were of African American or Native American descent. In December 1777, Viceroy Antonio Maria de Bucareli y Ursua and Commandant General Teodoro de Croix gave approval for the founding of a civic municipality at Los Angeles and a new presidio, or garrison, at Santa Barbara. Croix put the California Lieutenant Governor Fernando Rivera y Moncada in charge of recruiting colonists for the new settlements. He was originally to recruit 55 soldiers, 22 settlers with families and 1,000 head of livestock that would include horses for the military. After an exhaustive search that took him to Mazatlan, Rosario, and Durango, Rivera y Moncada recruited only 12 settlers and 45 soldiers. Like the settlers of most towns in New Spain, they had a mix of Indian and Spanish backgrounds. The Quechan Revolt killed 95 settlers and soldiers, including Rivera y Moncada. According to Croix's reglamento, the newly baptized Indians were no longer to reside in the mission but had to live in their traditional rancherias. Governor de Neve's plans for the Indians' role in his new town drew instant disapproval from the mission priests. Zúñiga's party arrived at the mission on 18 July 1781. Some had smallpox, so all were quarantined a short distance away from the mission. Members of the other party arrived at different times by August. They made their way to Los Angeles and probably received their land before September. The official date for the founding of the city is September 4, 1781. The families had arrived from New Spain earlier in 1781, in two groups, and some of them had most likely been working on their assigned plots of land since the early summer. The name first given to the settlement is debated. Historian Doyce B. Nunes has said that the Spanish named it, El Pueblo de la Reina de Los Angeles. For proof, he pointed to a map dated 1785, where that phrase was used. Frank Weber, the diocesan archivist, replied, however, that the name given by the founders was, El Pueblo de Nuestra Señora de Los Angeles de Porciuncula, or, the town of Our Lady of the Angels of Porciuncula, and that the map was in error. Spanish Pueblo. The town grew as soldiers and other settlers came into town and stayed. In 1784 a chapel was built on the original plaza. The original plaza was located a block north and west of the present one, its southeast corner being roughly where the northwesternmost point of the present plaza is, at the former intersection of Upper Main and Marchesas streets. It was also oriented diagonally, i.e. at precisely a 90-degree angle to the four compass points. The Pobladores were given title to their land 2 years later. By 1800, there were 29 buildings that surrounded the plaza, flat-roofed, one-story adobe buildings with thatched roofs made of tule. By 1821, Los Angeles had grown into a self-sustaining farming community, the largest in Southern California. Each settler received 4 rectangles of land, suertes, for farming, 2 irrigated plots and 2 dry ones. When the settlers arrived, the Los Angeles floodplain was heavily wooded with willows and oaks. The Los Angeles River flowed all year. Wildlife was plentiful, including deer and black bears, and even an occasional grizzly bear. There were abundant wetlands and swamps. Steelhead trout and salmon swam the rivers. The first settlers built a water system consisting of ditches leading from the river through the middle of town and into the farmlands. Indians were employed to haul fresh drinking water from a special pool farther upstream. The city was first known as a producer of fine wine grapes. The raising of cattle and the commerce in tallow and hides came later. Because of the great economic potential for Los Angeles, the demand for Indian labor grew rapidly. Yanga began attracting Indians from the Channel Islands and as far away as San Diego and San Luis Obispo. The village began to look like a refugee camp. Unlike the missions, the pobladores paid Indians for their labor. In exchange for their work as farm workers, vaqueros, ditch diggers, water haulers, and domestic help, they were paid in clothing and other goods as well as cash and alcohol. The pobladores bartered with them for prized sea otter and seal pelts, sieves, trays, baskets, mats, and other woven goods. This commerce greatly contributed to the economic success of the town and the attraction of other Indians to the city. During the 1780s, San Gabriel Mission became the object of an Indian revolt. The mission had expropriated all the suitable farming land. The Indians found themselves abused and forced to work on lands that they once owned. A young Indian healer, Toipurina, began touring the area, preaching against the injustices suffered by her people. She won over 4 rancherias and led them in an attack on the mission at San Gabriel. The soldiers were able to defend the mission, and arrested 17, including Toipurina. In 1787, Governor Pedro Fages outlined his instructions for the Corporal Guard of the Pueblo of Los Angeles. The instructions included rules for employing Indians, not using corporal punishment, and protecting the Indian rancherias. As a result, Indians found themselves with more freedom to choose between the benefits of the missions and the Pueblo-associated rancherias. In 1795, Sergeant Pablo Cota led an expedition from the Simi Valley through the Canillo-Calabasas region and into the San Fernando Valley. His party visited the rancho of Francisco Reyes. They found the local Indians hard at work as vaqueros and caring for crops. Padre Vincent de Santa Maria was traveling with the party and made these observations. All of Pagandam is fond of the pueblo of Los Angeles, of the rancho of Reyes, and of the ditches. Here we see nothing but pagans, clad in shoes, with sombreros and blankets, and serving as muleteers to the settlers and rancheros, so that if it were not for the Gentiles there were neither pueblos nor ranches. These pagan Indians care neither for the missions nor for the missionaries. Not only economic ties but also marriage drew many Indians into the life of the pueblo. In 1784, only 3 years after the founding, the first recorded marriages in Los Angeles took place. The two sons of settler Basilio Rosas, Maximo and José Carlos, married two young Indian women, Maria Antonia and Maria Dolores. The construction on the plaza of La Iglesia de Nuestra Señora de Los Angeles took place between 1818 and 1822, much of it with Indian labor. The new church completed Governor de Neve's planned transition of authority from mission to pueblo. The Angelinos no longer had to make the bumpy 11-mile ride to Sunday Mass at Mission San Gabriel. In 1811, the population of Los Angeles had increased to more than 500 persons, of which 91 were heads of families. In 1820, the route of El Camino Viejo was established from Los Angeles, over the mountains to the north and up the west side of the San Joaquin Valley to the east side of San Francisco Bay. Mexican era. 1821 to 1848. Mexico's independence from Spain on September 28, 1821, was celebrated with great festivity throughout Alta California. No longer subjects of the king, people were now ciudadanos, citizens with rights under the law. In the plazas of Monterey, Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, and other settlements, people swore allegiance to the new government, the Spanish flag was lowered, and the flag of independent Mexico raised. Independence brought other advantages, including economic growth. There was a corresponding increase in population as more Indians were assimilated and others arrived from America, Europe, and other parts of Mexico. Before 1820, there were just 650 people in the pueblo. By 1841, the population nearly tripled to 1,680. Secularization of the missions during the rest of the 1820s, the agriculture and cattle ranching expanded as did the trade in hides and tallow. The new church was completed, and the political life of the city developed. Los Angeles was separated from Santa Barbara administration. The system of ditches which provided water from the river was rebuilt. In 1827, Jonathan Temple and John Rice opened the first general store in the pueblo, soon followed by J. D. Leandri. Trade and commerce further increased with the secularization of the California missions by the Mexican Congress in 1833. Extensive mission lands suddenly became available to government officials, ranchers, and land speculators. The governor made more than 800 land grants during this period, including a grant of over 33,000 acres in 1839 to Francisco Sepulveda, which was later developed as the west side of Los Angeles. Much of this progress, however, bypassed the Indians of the traditional villages who were not assimilated into the mestizo culture. Being regarded as minors who could not think for themselves, they were increasingly marginalized and relieved of their land titles, often by being drawn into debt or alcohol. In 1834, Governor Pico was married to Maria Ignacio Alvarado in the Plaza Church. It was attended by the entire population of the pueblo, 800 people, plus hundreds from elsewhere in Alta California. In 1835, the Mexican Congress declared Los Angeles a city, making it the official capital of Alta California. It was now the region's leading city. The same period also saw the arrival of many foreigners from the United States and Europe. They played a pivotal role in the U.S. takeover. Early California settler John Bidwell included several historical figures in his recollection of people he knew in March, 1845. It then had probably 250 people, of whom I recall Don Abel Stearns, John Temple, Captain Alexander Bell, William Wolfskill, Lemuel Carpenter, David W. Alexander. Also of Mexicans, Pio Pico, Don Juan Bendini, and others. Upon arriving in Los Angeles in 1831, Jean-Louis Vignes bought 104 acres of land located between the original pueblo and the banks of the Los Angeles River. He planted a vineyard and prepared to make wine. He named his property El Aliso after the centuries-old tree found near the entrance. The grapes available at the time, of the mission variety, were brought to Alta California by the Franciscan brothers at the end of the 18th century. They grew well and yielded large quantities of wine, but Jean-Louis Vignes was not satisfied with the results. Therefore, he decided to import better vines from Bordeaux, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and Sauvignon Blanc. In 1840, Jean-Louis Vignes made the first recorded shipment of California wine. The Los Angeles market was too small for his production, and he loaded a shipment on the Monsoon, bound for Northern California. By 1842, he made regular shipments to Santa Barbara, Monterey, and San Francisco. By 1849, El Aliso was the most extensive vineyard in California. Vignay owned over 40,000 vines and produced 150,000 bottles, or 1,000 barrels, per year. In 1836, the Indian village of Yanga was relocated near the future corner of Commercial and Alameda Streets. In 1845, it was relocated again to present-day Boyle Heights. With the coming of the U.S. citizens, disease took a great toll among Indians. Self-employed Indians were not allowed to sleep over in the city. They faced increasing competition for jobs as more Mexicans moved into the area and took over the labor force. Those who loitered or were drunk or unemployed were arrested and auctioned off as laborers to those who paid their fines. They were often paid for work with liquor, which only increased their problems. Invasion by United States in May 1846, the Mexican-American War started. Because of Mexico's inability to defend its northern territories, California was exposed to invasion. On August 13, 1846, Commodore Robert F. Stockton, accompanied by John C. Fremont, seized the town. Governor Pico had fled to Mexico. From Stockton and Fremont until late 1849, all of California had a military governor. After 3 weeks of occupation, Stockton left, leaving Lieutenant Archibald H. Gillespie in charge. Subsequent dissatisfaction with Gillespie and his troops led to an uprising. A force of 300 locals drove the Americans out, ending the first phase of the Battle of Los Angeles. Further small skirmishes took place. Stockton regrouped in San Diego and marched north with 600 troops while Fremont marched south from Monterey with 400 troops. After a few skirmishes outside the city, the two forces entered Los Angeles, this time without bloodshed. Andrés Pico was in charge. He signed the so-called Treaty of Cahuenga on 13 January 1847, ending the California phase of the Mexican-American War. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, signed on 2 February 1848, ended the war and ceded California to the U.S. Early American Era, 1847 to 1870 according to historian Mary P. Ryan. The U.S. Army swept into California with the surveyor as well as the sword and quickly translated Spanish and Mexican practices into cartographic representations. Under colonial law, land held by grantees was not disposable. It reverted to the government. It was determined that under U.S. property law, lands owned by the city were disposable. Also, the diseños held by residents did not secure title in an American court. California's new military governor Bennett C. Riley ruled that land could not be sold that was not on a city map. In 1849, Lieutenant Edward Ord surveyed Los Angeles to confirm and extend the streets of the city. His survey put the city into the real estate business, creating its first real estate boom and filling its treasury. Street names were changed from Spanish to English. Further surveys and street plans replaced the original plan for the Pueblo with a new civic center south of the plaza and a new use of space. The fragmentation of Los Angeles real estate on the Anglo-Mexican axis had begun. Under the Spanish system, the residences of the power elite clustered around the plaza in the center of town. In the new U.S. system, the power elite resided in the outskirts. The emerging minorities, including the Chinese, Italians, French, and Russians, joined with the Mexicans near the plaza. In 1848, the gold discovered in Coloma first brought thousands of miners from Sonora in northern Mexico on the way to the gold fields. So many of them settled in the area north of the plaza that it came to be known as Sonora Town. During the gold rush years in Northern California, Los Angeles became known as the Queen of the Cow Counties, for its role in supplying beef and other foodstuffs to hungry miners in the north. Among the cow counties, Los Angeles County had the largest herds in the state, followed closely by Santa Barbara and Monterey counties. With the temporary absence of a legal system, the city quickly was submerged in lawlessness. Many of the New York Regiment disbanded at the end of the war and charged with maintaining order were thugs and brawlers. They roamed the streets joined by gamblers, outlaws, and prostitutes driven out of San Francisco and mining towns of the north by vigilance committees or lynch mobs. Los Angeles came to be known as the toughest and most lawless city west of Santa Fe. Some of the residents resisted the new powers by resorting to banditry against the gringos. In 1856, Juan Flores threatened Southern California with a full-scale revolt. He was hanged in Los Angeles in front of 3,000 spectators. Tiburcio Vázquez, a legend in his own time among the Mexican-born population for his daring feats against the Anglos, was captured in present-day Santa Clarita, California, on May 14, 1874. He was found guilty of 2 counts of murder by a San Jose jury in 1874, and was hanged there in 1875. Los Angeles had several active, vigilance committees during that era. Between 1850 and 1870, mobs carried out approximately 35 lynchings of Mexicans, more than 4 times the number that occurred in San Francisco. Los Angeles was described as, undoubtedly the toughest town of the entire nation. The homicide rate between 1847 and 1870 averaged 158 per 100,000, which was 10 to 20 times the annual murder rates for New York City during the same period. The fear of Mexican violence and the racially motivated violence inflicted on them further marginalized the Mexicans, greatly reducing their economic and political opportunities. John Gately Downey, the 7th Governor of California, was sworn into office on January 14, 1860, thereby becoming the first governor from Southern California. Governor Downey was born and raised in Castlesampson, County Roscommon, Ireland, and came to Los Angeles in 1850. He was responsible for keeping California in the Union during the Civil War. Plight of the Indians. Los Angeles was incorporated as a U.S. city on April 4, 1850. 5 months later, California was admitted into the Union. Although the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo required the U.S. to grant citizenship to the Indians of former Mexican territories, it did not happen for another 80 years. The Constitution of California deprived Indians of any protection under the law, considering them as non-persons. As a result, it was impossible to bring an Anglo to trial for killing an Indian or forcing Indians off their properties. Anglos concluded that the quickest and best way to get rid of troublesome presence was to kill them off. This procedure was adopted as a standard for many years. With the coming of the U.S. citizens, disease took a great toll among Indians. Self-employed Indians were not allowed to sleep over in the city. They faced increasing competition for jobs as more Mexicans moved into the area and took over the labor force. Those who loitered or were drunk or unemployed were arrested and auctioned off as laborers to those who paid their fines. They were often paid for work with liquor, which only increased their problems. When New England author and Indian rights activist Helen Hunt Jackson toured the Indian villages of Southern California in 1883, she was appalled by the racism of the Anglos living there. She wrote that they treated Indians worse than animals, hunted them for sport, robbed them of their farmlands, and brought them to the edge of extermination. While Indians were depicted by whites as lazy and shiftless, she found most of them to be hard-working craftsmen and farmers. Jackson's tour inspired her to write her 1884 novel Ramona, which she hoped would give a human face to the atrocities and indignities suffered by the Indians in California, and it did. The novel was enormously successful, inspiring 4 movies and a yearly pageant in Hemet, California. Many of the Indian villages of Southern California survived because of her efforts, including Morongo, Cahuilla, Saboba, Temecula, Pechinga, and Warner Springs. Remarkably, the Tongva also survived. In 2006, the Los Angeles Times reported that there were 2,000 of them still living in Southern California. Some were organizing to protect burial and cultural sites. Others were trying to win federal recognition as a tribe to operate a casino. Industrial expansion and growth. The city's first newspaper, Star of Los Angeles, was a bilingual publication which began its run in 1851. In the 1870s, Los Angeles was still little more than a village of 5,000. By 1900, there were over 100,000 occupants of the city. Several men actively promoted Los Angeles, working to develop it into a great city and to make themselves rich. Angelenos set out to remake their geography to challenge San Francisco with its port facilities, railway terminal, banks and factories. The Farmers and Merchants Bank of Los Angeles was the first incorporated bank in Los Angeles, founded in 1871 by John G. Downey and Isaiah W. Hellman. Wealthy Easterners who came as tourists recognized the growth opportunities and invested heavily in the region. During the 1880s and 1890s, the Central Business District grew along Main and Spring Streets towards 2nd Street and beyond. Much of Los Angeles County was farmland, with an emphasis on cattle, dairy products, vegetables and citrus fruits. After 1945, most of the farmland was converted into housing tracts. Railroads. The city's first railroad, the Los Angeles and San Pedro Railroad, was inaugurated in October 1869 by John G. Downey and Phineas Banning. It ran 21 miles between San Pedro and Los Angeles. The town continued to grow at a moderate pace. Railroads finally arrived to connect with the Central Pacific and San Francisco in 1876. The impact was small. Much greater was the impact of the Santa Fe system in 1885. The Santa Fe and Southern Pacific lines provided direct connections to the east, competed vigorously for business with much lower rates, and stimulated economic growth. Tourists poured in by the thousands every week, and many planned on returning or resettling. The city still lacked a modern harbor. Phineas Banning excavated a channel out of the mudflats of San Pedro Bay leading to Wilmington in 1871. Banning had already laid track and shipped in locomotives to connect the port to the city. Harrison Gray Otis, founder and owner of the Los Angeles Times, and a number of business colleagues embarked on reshaping Southern California by expanding that into a harbor at San Pedro using federal dollars. This put them in conflict with Collis P. Huntington, president of the Southern Pacific Company and one of California's Big Four investors in the Central Pacific and Southern Pacific. Southern Pacific had initially supported the San Pedro port, and when in 1875 a potential rival emerged in a Santa Monica wharf connected to downtown by the Los Angeles and Independence Railroad, Southern Pacific bought the railroad and demolished the wharf. However, by the 1890s Southern Pacific favored a location for the Port of Los Angeles in Santa Monica because of their control of the land there, and opened the Long Wharf in 1894. The wharf extended 4,600 feet into the ocean, and was the longest wharf in the world at the time. The Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce feared Southern Pacific controlling the port, and so attempted to favor the San Pedro location, sparking the Free Harbor Fight. Congress authorized the Army Corps of Engineers to choose the location, and in 1897 they chose San Pedro. In 1876 the Newhall Railroad Tunnel located 27 miles north of Los Angeles between the town of San Fernando and Lyon Station stagecoach stop was completed, providing the final link from San Francisco to Los Angeles for the railroad. The 6,940-foot-long railroad tunnel took a year and a half to complete. More than 1,500 mostly Chinese laborers took part in the tunnel construction, which began at the south end of the mountain on March 22, 1875. Many of them had prior experience working on Southern Pacific's located tunnels in the Tehachapi Pass. Due to the sandstone composition of the mountain that was saturated with water and oil, frequent cave-ins occurred and the bore had to be constantly shored up by timbers during excavation. The initial location for the north end of the tunnel near Newhall was abandoned due to this. The north end of the tunnel excavation commenced in June 1875. Water was a constant problem during construction and pumps were utilized to keep the tunnel from flooding. Workers digging from both the north and south ends of the tunnel came face to face on July 14, 1876. The bores from each end were only a half-inch out of line with dimensions of 22 feet high, 16.5 feet wide at the bottom and over 18 feet at the shoulders. Track was laid in place soon after the tunnel dig was completed and the first train passed through on August 12, 1876. On September 4, Charles Crocker notified Southern Pacific that the track had been completed on the route between San Francisco and Los Angeles. The San Pedro forces eventually prevailed. Work on the San Pedro breakwater began in 1899 and was finished in 1910. Otis Chandler and his allies secured a change in state law in 1909 that allowed Los Angeles to absorb San Pedro and Wilmington, using a long, narrow corridor of land to connect them with the rest of the city. The debacle of the future Los Angeles harbor was termed the Free Harbor Fight. Streetcar service in Los Angeles began with horse cars, cable cars and electric streetcars starting in 1887 to 1963. In 1898, Henry Huntington and a San Francisco syndicate led by Isaiah W. Hellman purchased 5 trolley lines, consolidated them into the Los Angeles Railway and 2 years later founded the Pacific Electric Railway. Los Angeles Railway served the city and the Pacific Electric Railway served the rest of the county. At its peak, Pacific Electric was the largest electrically operated interurban railway in the world. Over 1,000 miles of tracks connected Los Angeles with Hollywood, Pasadena, San Pedro, Long Beach, Venice Beach, Santa Monica, even as far as Riverside, San Bernardino, Santa Ana, and Newport Beach. The Guardian concluded that at their peak, the Pacific Electric and Los Angeles Railway made the region's public transportation the best in the country, if not the world. Oil discovery. Oil was discovered by Edward L. Doheny in 1892, near the present location of Dodger Stadium. The Los Angeles City oil field was the first of many fields in the basin to be exploited, and in 1900 and 1902, respectively, the Beverly Hills oil field and Salt Lake oil field were discovered a few miles west of the original find. Los Angeles became a center of oil production in the early 20th century, and by 1923, the region was producing 1/4 of the world's total supply. It is still a significant producer, with the Wilmington oil field having the 4th largest reserves of any field in California. Conflicts. With the growth of Los Angeles came conflicts and a high crime rate. Some of the conflicts were racial. The Chinese Massacre of 1871. For a fuller account, see Chinese Massacre of 1871. Although there had been some anti-Chinese behavior in the preceding decades, editorial attacks in the local press beginning just before 1870 was followed by increased attacks. In 1871, following a shootout involving rival Huignans, a policeman was wounded and a popular white citizen was killed. In reprisal, 18 Chinese men and boys were hanged by a mob, though only one of those lynched had been involved in the shootings. Populism. At the same time that the Los Angeles Times was spurring enthusiasm for the expansion of Los Angeles, the newspaper was also trying to turn it into a union-free or open shop town. Fruit growers and local merchants who had opposed the Pullman strike in 1894 subsequently formed the Merchants and Manufacturers Association to support the Times's anti-union campaign. The California labor movement, with its strength concentrated in San Francisco, largely had ignored Los Angeles for years. However, in 1907, the American Federation of Labor decided to challenge the open shop. In 1909, the City Fathers placed a ban on free speech from public streets and private property except for the plaza. Locals had claimed that it had been an open forum forever. The area was of particular concern to Harrison Gray Otis and his son-in-law Harry Chandler. This conflict came to a head with the bombing of the Times in 1910. 2 months later, the Llewellyn Iron Works near the plaza was bombed. A meeting hastily was called of the Chamber of Commerce and Manufacturers Association. The LA Times wrote, "Radical and practical matters considered, and steps taken for the adaptation of such as are adequate to cope with a situation tardily recognized as the gravest that Los Angeles has ever been called upon to face." The authorities indicted John and James McNamara, both associated with the Iron Workers Union, for the bombing. Clarence Darrow, famed Chicago defense lawyer, represented them. At the same time the McNamara brothers were awaiting trial, Los Angeles was preparing for a city election. Job Harriman, running on the socialist ticket, was challenging the establishment's candidate. Harriman's campaign, however, was tied to the asserted innocence of the McNamaras. But the defense was in trouble. The prosecution not only had evidence of the McNamara's complicity, but had trapped Darrow in a clumsy attempt to bribe one of the jurors. On December 1, 1911, 4 days before the final election, the McNamaras entered a plea of guilty in return for prison terms. Harriman lost badly. On Christmas Day, 1913, police attempted to break up an IWW rally of 500 taking place in the plaza. Encountering resistance, the police waded into the crowd attacking them with their clubs. One citizen was killed. In the aftermath, the authorities attempted to impose martial law in the wake of growing protests. 73 people were arrested in connection with the riots. The city council introduced new measures to control public speaking. The Times called onlookers and taco vendors cultural subversives. The open shop campaign continued from strength to strength, although not without meeting opposition from workers. By 1923, the industrial workers of the world had made considerable progress in organizing the longshoremen in San Pedro and led approximately 3,000 men to walk off the job. With the support of the Los Angeles Times, a special Red Squad was formed within the Los Angeles Police Department and arrested so many strikers that the city's jails were soon filled. Some 1,200 dock workers were corralled in a special stockade in Griffith Park. The Times wrote approvingly that stockades and forced labor were a good remedy for IWW terrorism. Public meetings were outlawed in San Pedro. Upton Sinclair was arrested at Liberty Hill in San Pedro for reading the United States Bill of Rights on the private property of a strike supporter, and blanket arrests were made at union gatherings. The strike ended after members of the Ku Klux Klan and the American Legion raided the IWW Hall and attacked the men, women and children meeting there. The strike was defeated. Los Angeles developed another industry in the early 20th century when movie producers from the East Coast relocated there. These new employers were likewise afraid of unions and other social movements. During Upton Sinclair's campaign for governor of California under the banner of his End Poverty in California movement, Louis B. Mayer turned MGM's Culver City studio into the unofficial headquarters of the organized campaign against Epic. MGM produced fake newsreel interviews with whiskered actors with Russian accents voicing their enthusiasm for Epic, along with footage focusing on central casting hobos huddled on the borders of California waiting to enter and live off the bounty of its taxpayers once Sinclair was elected. Sinclair, however, lost the election. Los Angeles also acquired another industry in the years just before World War II, the garment industry. At first devoted to regional merchandise such as sportswear, the industry eventually grew to be the second largest center of garment production in the United States. Progressives, the immigrants arriving in the city to find jobs, sometimes brought the revolutionary zeal and idealism of their homelands. These included anarchists such as Russian Emma Goldman and Ricardo Flores Magón and his brother Enrique of the Partido Liberal Mexicano. They later were joined by the socialist candidate for mayor Job Harriman, Chinese revolutionaries, the novelist Upton Sinclair, Wobblies, and socialist and communist labor organizers such as the Japanese-American Carl Yaneda and the Russian-born New Yorker Meyer Balin. The socialists were the first to set up a soapbox in the plaza, which served as the location of union rallies and protests and riots as the police attempted to break up meetings. Unions began to make progress in organizing these workers as the New Deal arrived in the 1930s. An influential strike was the Los Angeles Garment Workers' Strike of 1933, one of the first strikes in which Mexican immigrant workers played a prominent role for union recognition. The unions made even greater gains in the war years, as Los Angeles grew further. Today, the ethnic makeup of the city and the dominance of progressive political views among its voters have made Los Angeles a strong union town. However, many garment workers in central LA, most of whom are Mexican immigrants, still work in sweatshop conditions. Battle of the Los Angeles River. The Los Angeles River flowed clear and fresh all year, supporting 45 Tongva villages in the area. The source of the river was the aquifer under the San Fernando Valley, supplied with water from the surrounding mountains. The rising of the underground bedrock at the Glendale Narrows squeezed the water to the surface at that point. Then, through much of the year, the river emerged from the valley to flow across the floodplain 20 miles to the sea. The area also provided other streams, lakes, and artesian wells. Early settlers were more than a little discouraged by the region's diverse and unpredictable weather. They watched helplessly as long droughts weakened and starved their livestock, only to be drowned and carried off by ferocious storms. During the years of little rain, people built too close to the riverbed, only to see their homes and barns later swept to sea during a flood. The location of the Los Angeles Plaza had to be moved twice because of previously having been built too close to the riverbed. Worse, floods changed the river's course. When the settlers arrived, the river joined Bologna Creek to discharge in Santa Monica Bay. A fierce storm in 1835 diverted its course to Long Beach, where it stays today. Early citizens could not even maintain a footbridge over the river from one side of the city to the other. After the American takeover, the city council authorized spending of $20,000 for a contractor to build a substantial wooden bridge across the river. The first storm to come along dislodged the bridge, used it as a battering ram to break through the embankment, and scattered its timbers all the way to the sea. Some of the most concentrated rainfall in the history of the United States has occurred in the San Gabriel Mountains north of Los Angeles and Orange counties. On April 5, 1926, a rain gauge in the San Gabriels collected 1 inch in 1 minute. In January, 1969, more water fell on the San Gabriels in 9 days than New York City sees in a year. In February 1978, almost a foot of rain fell in 24 hours, and, in one blast, 1.5 inches in 5 minutes. This storm caused massive debris flows throughout the region, one of them unearthing the corpses in the Verdugo Hills Cemetery and depositing them in the town below. Another wiped out the small town of Hidden Springs in a tributary of the Big Tujunga Creek, killing 13 people. The greatest daily rainfall recorded in California was 26.12 inches on January 23, 1943, at Hojies near Mount Wilson in the San Gabriel Mountains. 15 other stations reported over 20 inches in 2 days from the same storm. 45 others reported 70% of the average annual rainfall in 2 days. Quibbling between city and county governments delayed any response to the flooding until a massive storm in 1938 flooded Los Angeles and Orange counties. The federal government stepped in. To transfer floodwater to the sea as quickly as possible, the Army Corps of Engineers paved the beds of the river and its tributaries. The Corps also built several dams and catchment basins in the canyons along the San Gabriel Mountains to reduce the debris flows. It was an enormous project, taking years to complete. Today, the Los Angeles River functions mainly as a flood control. A drop of rain falling in the San Gabriel Mountains will reach the sea faster than an auto can drive. During today's rainstorms, the volume of the Los Angeles River at Long Beach can be as large as the Mississippi River at St. Louis. The drilling of wells and pumping of water from the San Fernando Valley aquifer dried up the river by the 1920s. By 1980, the aquifer was supplying drinking water for 800,000 people. In that year, it was discovered that the aquifer had been contaminated. Many wells were shut down, as the area qualified as a Superfund site. Water from a distance for its first 120 years, the Los Angeles River supplied the town with ample water for homes and farms. It was estimated that the annual flow could have supported a town of 250,000 people, if the water had been managed right. But Angelenos were among the more profligate users of water in the world. In the semi-arid climate, they were forever watering their lawns, gardens, orchards, and vineyards. Later, they needed more to support the growth of commerce and manufacturing. By the beginning of the 20th century, the town realized it quickly would outgrow its river and would need new sources of water. Legitimate concerns about water supply were exploited to gain backing for a huge engineering and legal effort to bring more water to the city and allow more development. The city fathers had their eyes on the Owens River, about 250 miles northeast of Los Angeles in Inyo County, near the Nevada state line. It was a permanent stream of fresh water fed by the melted snows of the eastern Sierra Nevada. It flowed through the Owens River Valley before emptying into the shallow, saline Owens Lake, where it evaporated. Sometime between 1899 and 1903, Harrison Gray Otis and his son-in-law successor, Harry Chandler, engaged in successful efforts at buying cheap land on the northern outskirts of Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley. At the same time, they enlisted the help of William Mulholland, chief engineer of the Los Angeles Water Department, and J.B. Lippincott, of the United States Reclamation Service. Lippincott performed water surveys in the Owens Valley for the service while secretly receiving a salary from the city of Los Angeles. He succeeded in persuading Owens Valley farmers and mutual water companies to pool their interests and surrender the water rights to 200,000 acres of land to Fred Eaton, Lippincott's agent and a former mayor of Los Angeles. Lippincott then resigned from the Reclamation Service, took a job with the Los Angeles Water Department as assistant to Mulholland, and turned over the Reclamation Service maps, field surveys and stream measurements to the city. Those studies served as the basis for designing the longest aqueduct in the world. By July 1905, the Times began to warn the voters of Los Angeles that the county would soon dry up unless they voted bonds for building the aqueduct. Artificial drought conditions were created when water was run into the sewers to decrease the supply in the reservoirs, and residents were forbidden to water their lawns and gardens. On Election Day, the people of Los Angeles voted for $22.5 million worth of bonds to build an aqueduct from the Owens River and to defray other expenses of the project. With this money, and with an act of Congress allowing cities to own property outside their boundaries, the city acquired the land that Eaton had acquired from the Owens Valley farmers and started to build the aqueduct. On the occasion of the opening of the Los Angeles Aqueduct on November 5, 1913, Mulholland's entire speech was 5 words. There it is. Take it. Boomtown. 1913 to 1941. Hollywood has been synonymous worldwide with the film industry for over 100 years. It was incorporated as the City of Hollywood in 1903 but merged into LA in 1910. In the 1900s, movie makers from New York found the sunny, temperate weather more suitable for year-round location shooting. It boomed into the cinematic heart of the United States, and has been the home and workplace of actors, directors and singers that range from small and independent to world-famous, leading to the development of related television and music industries. Notable events: swimming pool desegregation and end to racial segregation in municipal swimming pools was ordered in summer 1931 by a Superior Court judge after Ethel Priolo sued the city, complaining that she as a Negro was not allowed to use the pool in nearby Exposition Park but had to travel 3.6 miles to the designated Negro swimming pool. Summer Olympics: Los Angeles hosted the 1932 Summer Olympics. The Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, which had opened in May 1923 with a seating capacity of 76,000, was enlarged to accommodate over 100,000 spectators for Olympic events. Olympic Boulevard, a major thoroughfare, honors the occasion. It is still in use by the USC Trojans football team. Griffith Park fire: a devastating brush fire on October 3, 1933, killed 29 and injured another 150 workers who were clearing brush in Griffith Park. Annexations and consolidations: the city of Los Angeles mostly remained within its original 28-square-mile land grant until the 1890s. The original city limits are visible even today in the layout of streets that changes from a north-south pattern outside of the original land grant to a pattern that is shifted roughly 15 degrees east of the longitude in and closely around the area now known as downtown. The first large additions to the city were the districts of Highland Park and Garvanza to the north, and the South Los Angeles area. In 1906, the approval of the Port of Los Angeles and a change in state law allowed the city to annex the Shoestring, or Harbor Gateway, a narrow and crooked strip of land leading from Los Angeles south towards the port. The port cities of San Pedro and Wilmington were added in 1909 and the city of Hollywood was added in 1910, bringing the city up to 90 square miles and giving it a vertical, barbell, shape. Also added that year was Colgrove, a suburb west-northwest of the city near Hollywood. Cahuenga, a township northwest of the former city limits, and a part of Los Feliz was annexed to the city. The opening of the Los Angeles Aqueduct provided the city with 4 times as much water as it required, and the offer of water service became a powerful lure for neighboring communities. The city, saddled with a large bond and excess water, locked in customers through annexation by refusing to supply other communities. Harry Chandler, a major investor in San Fernando Valley real estate, used his Los Angeles Times to promote development near the aqueduct's outlet. By referendum of the residents, 170 square miles of the San Fernando Valley, along with the Palms District, were added to the city in 1915, almost tripling its area, mostly towards the northwest. Over the next 17 years, dozens of additional annexations brought the city's area to 450 square miles in 1932. As of 2004, most of the annexed communities were unincorporated towns, but 10 incorporated cities were consolidated with Los Angeles: Wilmington, San Pedro, Hollywood, Sawtell, Hyde Park, Eagle Rock, Venice, Watts, Barnes City, and Tujunga. Civic corruption and police brutality: the downtown business interests, always eager to attract business and investment to Los Angeles, were also eager to distance their town from the criminal underworld that defined the stories of Chicago and New York. In spite of their concerns, massive corruption in City Hall and the Los Angeles Police Department, and the fight against it, were dominant themes in the city's story from early 20th century to the 1950s. In the 1920s, for example, it was common practice for the city's mayor, councilmen, and attorneys to take contributions from madams, bootleggers, and gamblers. The top aide of the mayor was involved with a protection racket. Thugs with Eastern Mafia connections were involved in often violent conflicts over bootlegging and horse racing turf. The mayor's brother was selling jobs in the Los Angeles Police Department. In 1933, the new mayor Frank Shaw started giving contracts without competitive bids and paying city employees to favor crony contractors. The city's vice squad functioned citywide as the enforcer and collector of the city's organized crime, with revenues going to the pockets of city officials right up to the mayor. In 1937, the owner of downtown's Clifton's Cafeteria, Clifford Clinton, led a citizens' campaign to clean up City Hall. He and other reformers served on a grand jury investigating the charges of corruption. In a minority report, the reformers wrote, "A portion of the underworld profits have been used in financing campaigns. City and county officials in vital positions. The district attorney's office, sheriff's office, and Los Angeles Police Department work in complete harmony and never interfere with important figures in the underworld. The police intelligence squad spied on anyone even suspected of criticizing the police. They included journalist Kerry McWilliams, the district attorney, Judge Fletcher Bowen, and 2 of the county supervisors." The persistent courage of Clinton, Superior Court judge and later mayor, Fletcher Bowen, and former police detective Harry Raymond turned the tide. The police became so nervous that the intelligence squad blew up Raymond's car and nearly killed him. The public was so enraged by the bombing that it quickly voted Shaw out of office, one of the first big city recalls in the country's history. The head of the intelligence squad was convicted and sentenced to 2 years to life. Police Chief James Davis and 23 other officers were forced to resign. Fletcher Bowen replaced Shaw as mayor in 1938 to preside over one of the more dynamic periods in the history of the city. His Los Angeles urban reform revival brought major changes to the government of Los Angeles. In 1950, he appointed William H. Parker as chief of police. Parker pushed for more independence from political pressures that enabled him to create a more professionalized police force. The public supported him and voted in charter changes that isolated the police department from the rest of government. Through the 1960s, the LAPD was promoted as one of the more efficient departments in the world. But Parker's administration increasingly was charged with police brutality, resulting from his recruiting of officers from the South with strong anti-black and anti-Mexican attitudes. Reaction to police brutality resulted in the Watts riots of 1965 and in the Los Angeles riots of 1992, after the Rodney King beating. Charges of police brutality dogged the department through the end of the 20th century. In the late 1990s, as a result of the Rampart scandal involving misconduct of 70 officers, the federal government was forced to intervene and assume jurisdiction of the department with a consent decree. Police reform has since been a major issue confronted by the city's mayors. Social critic Mike Davis argued that attempts to revitalize downtown Los Angeles decreases public space and further alienates poor and minority populations. This enforced geographical separation of diverse populations goes back to the city's earliest days. LAX, Los Angeles International Airport Minesfield opened as the private airport in 1930, and the city purchased it to be the municipal airfield in 1937. The name became Los Angeles Airport in 1941 and Los Angeles International Airport in 1949. In the 1930s, the main airline airports were Hollywood Burbank Airport in Burbank and the Grand Central Airport in Glendale. In 1940, the airlines were all at Burbank except for Mexicana's 3 departures a week from Glendale. In late 1946 most airline flights moved to LAX, but Burbank always retained a few. Since then, there has been relentless expansion and the spin-off of hotels and warehouses nearby. World War II. 1941 to 1945. During World War II, Los Angeles grew as a center for production of aircraft, ships, war supplies, and ammunition. Aerospace employers headquartered in the Los Angeles metropolitan area like Hughes Aircraft Company, Northrop Corporation, Douglas Aircraft Company, Vultee Aircraft, and Lockheed Corporation were able to provide the nation's demand for the war effort in producing strategic bombers and fighter aircraft like B-17s, B-25s, A-36s, and P-51 Mustangs needed to bomb the war machine of the Axis powers. As a result, the Los Angeles area grew faster than any other major metropolitan area in the U.S. and experienced more of the traumas of war while doing so. By 1943, the population of Los Angeles County was larger than 37 states, and was home to 1 in every 40 U.S. citizens, as millions across the U.S. came to Southern California to find employment in the defense industries. The Japanese-American community in Los Angeles was greatly impacted since Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor pulled the U.S. into World War II, and America feared that the fifth column was widespread among the community. In response, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, authorizing military commanders to exclude any or all persons from certain areas in the name of national defense. The Western Defense Command began ordering Japanese Americans living on the West Coast to present themselves for evacuation from the newly created military zones. This included many Los Angeles families, of which 80,000 relocated to the Japanese American internment camps throughout the duration of the war. The war also lured a large number of African Americans from the rural impoverished southern states to the Los Angeles area in the second chapter of the Great Migration, due to manpower industrial shortages and Executive Order 8802, which prohibited discrimination in wartime defense industries. Lonnie Bunch, a longtime historian with the Smithsonian Institution, wrote, between 1942 to 1945, some 340,000 blacks settled in California, 200,000 of whom migrated to Los Angeles. Most of these migrants to Los Angeles came from south-central states like Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. African Americans particularly benefited from defense jobs created in Los Angeles County during the war, especially Terminal Island, where it was one of the first places of integrated, defense-related work on the West Coast. Though Jim Crow laws did not exist in Los Angeles as it had in the South, black migrants continued to face racial discrimination in most aspects of life, especially widespread housing segregation and redlining due to overcrowding and perceived lower property value during and after the war, in which they were restricted from advanced opportunities in affluent white areas and confined to an exclusive black majority area of south-central Los Angeles. As with a few other wartime industrial cities in the U.S., Los Angeles experienced a racial-related conflict stemming from the Zoot Suit riots in June 1943, in which American servicemen and local whites attacked young Mexican Americans in zoot suits. Many military personnel regarded the Zoot suits as unpatriotic and flamboyant in time of war, as they had a lot of fabric, coupled with widespread racism against Mexicans and Mexican Americans as unintelligent and inferior. The Los Angeles Police Department stood by as the rioting happened, arresting hundreds of Hispanic residents instead of the attackers. Riots against Latinos in Los Angeles also erupted in a similar fashion in other cities in California, Texas, and Arizona, as well as northern cities like Chicago, Philadelphia, and Detroit. While Los Angeles County never faced enemy bombing and invasion, it nevertheless became an integral part of the American theater on the night of February 24–25, 1942, during the False Battle of Los Angeles, which occurred a day after the Japanese naval bombardment of Elwood in Santa Barbara, California, 80 miles from Los Angeles. Reacting to a report that enemy planes had been spotted over Los Angeles, anti-aircraft gunners in the area fired on the approaching aircraft what was later known to be a U.S. Army weather balloon. Lasted for 2 hours, 5 people died in the Battle of Los Angeles, from car crashes in the confusing darkness to people having heart attacks due to loud anti-aircraft gun bursts. In spite of this, the Japanese had plans to actually bomb Los Angeles with giant seaplanes in anticipation of the proposed large-scale invasion of the continental United States. Those raids never came about, but the Japanese had the planes and wherewithal to accomplish such a raid throughout the war. Post-war. Baby boomers after the war, hundreds of land developers bought land cheap, subdivided it, built on it, and got rich. Real estate development replaced oil and agriculture as Southern California's principal industry. In July 1955, Walt Disney opened the world's first theme park called Disneyland in Anaheim. 9 years later, Universal Studios opened its first theme park with the Public Studio Tour tram at Universal City. This later touched off a theme park war between Disney and Universal that continue on to the present day. In 1958, Major League Baseball's Dodgers and Giants left New York City and came to Los Angeles and San Francisco, respectively. The population of California expanded dramatically, to nearly 20 million by 1970. This was the coming of age of the baby boom. By 1950, Los Angeles was an industrial and financial giant created by war production and migration. Los Angeles assembled more cars than any city other than Detroit, made more tires than any city but Akron, Ohio, made more furniture than Grand Rapids, Michigan, and stitched more clothes than any city except New York. In addition, it was the national capital for the production of motion pictures, Army and Navy training films, radio programs and, within a few years, television shows. Construction boomed as tract houses were built in ever-expanding suburban communities financed by the GI Bill for veterans and the Federal Housing Administration. Popular music of the period bore titles such as California Girls, California Dreamin', San Francisco, Do You Know the Way to San Jose, and Hotel California. These reflected the Californian promise of easy living in a paradisiacal climate. The surfing culture burgeoned. Los Angeles continued to spread, particularly with the development of the San Fernando Valley and the building of the freeways launched in the 1940s. When the local streetcar system went out of business due to the gas automobile industry, Los Angeles became a city shaped around the automobile, with all the social, health and political problems that this dependence produces. The famed urban sprawl of Los Angeles became a notable feature of the town, and the pace of the growth accelerated in the first decades of the 20th century. The San Fernando Valley, sometimes called America's suburb, became a favorite site of developers, and the city began growing past its roots downtown toward the ocean and towards the east. The immense problem with air pollution that had developed by the early 1970s also caused a backlash. Schools were closed routinely in urban areas for smog days, when the ozone levels became too unhealthy, and the hills surrounding urban areas were seldom visible even within a mile. Californians were ready for changes. Over the next 3 decades, California enacted some of the strictest anti-smog regulations in the United States and has been a leader in encouraging non-polluting strategies for various industries, including automobiles. For example, carpool lanes normally allow only vehicles with 2, 3 or more occupants, but electric cars can use the lanes with only a single occupant. As a result, smog is significantly reduced from its peak, although local air quality management districts still monitor the air and generally encourage people to avoid polluting activities on hot days when smog is expected to be at its worst. 1950 to 2000. Beginning November 6, 1961, Los Angeles suffered 3 days of destructive brush fires. The Bel Air, Brentwood and Santa Ynez fires destroyed 484 expensive homes and 21 other buildings along with 15,810 acres of brush in the Bel Air, Brentwood, and Topanga Canyon neighborhoods. Most of the homes destroyed had wooden shake roofs, which not only led to their own loss but also sent firebrands up to 3 miles away. Despite this, few changes were made to the building codes to prevent future losses. The repeal of a law limiting building height and the controversial redevelopment of Bunker Hill, which destroyed a picturesque though decrepit neighborhood, ushered in the construction of a new generation of skyscrapers. Bunker Hill's 62-floor First Interstate building was the highest in Los Angeles when it was completed in 1973. It was surpassed by the Library Tower a few blocks to the north in 1990, a 310 meters building that is the tallest west of the Mississippi. Outside of downtown, the Wilshire Corridor is lined with tall buildings, particularly near Westwood. Century City, developed on the former 20th Century Fox backlot, has become another center of high-rise construction on the west side. During the latter decades of the 20th century, the city saw a massive increase of street gangs. At the same time, crack cocaine became widely available and dominated by gangs in the 1980s. Although gangs were disproportionately confined to lower-income inner-city sections, fear knew no boundaries citywide. Since the early 1990s, the city saw a decrease in crime and gang violence with rising prices in housing, revitalization, urban development, and heavy police vigilance in many parts of the city. With its reputation, it had led to Los Angeles being referred as the gang capital of America. A subway system, developed and built through the 1980s as a major goal of Mayor Tom Bradley, stretches from North Hollywood to Union Station and connects the light rail lines that extend to the neighboring cities of Long Beach, Norwalk, and Pasadena, among others. Also, a commuter rail system, Metrolink, has been added that stretches from nearby Ventura and Simi Valley to San Bernardino, Orange County, and Riverside. The funding of the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority project is funded by a half-cent tax increase added in the mid-1980s, which yields $400 million every month. Although the regional transit system is growing, subway expansion was halted in the 1990s over methane gas concerns, political conflict, and construction and financing problems during Red Line subway project, which culminated in a massive sinkhole on Hollywood Boulevard. As a result, the original subway plans have been delayed for decades as light rail systems, dedicated busways, and limited-stop, rapid bus routes have become the preferred means of mass transit in LA's expanding series of gridlocked, congested corridors. The 1995 murder of Stephanie Cuen in Los Angeles led to condemnation from President Bill Clinton and a crackdown on Los Angeles area gangs. Racially restrictive housing covenants were a major part of Los Angeles housing development and selling of real estate. Racially restrictive covenants were court-private agreements included in title deeds that prohibited the selling of property to certain races. The first racially restrictive covenant in Los Angeles dates to 1902 and used the term non-Caucasians to restrict people of color from dwelling in that home. Other language used in covenants excluded specific ethnic groups and sometimes only allowed non-whites to occupy a property if they were domestic workers. There was a tendency to exclude Mexican Americans, despite they were legally white. Due to Spanish ancestry, Mexican immigrants tend to be indigenous people or mestizo. Racially restrictive covenants were implemented by housing developers, real estate agencies, and homeowners associations for the purpose of creating racial and class-segregated neighborhoods. Racially restrictive covenants were also implemented in housing developments to secure homogeneous and economically stable neighborhoods. The Jan's Investment Company built the community of Westwood. They included racial restrictions in all of their properties that specifically excluded any person who is not of the white or the Caucasian race. Examples of communities in Los Angeles that were built with racial restrictions in deeds are Thousand Oaks, Palos Verdes, Beverly Hills, Bel Air, Westchester, Panorama City, West Side Village, and Toluca Woods, among others. In 1892, the federal courts ruled that neither state nor city governments could discriminate but upheld the right to enter into racial and class-restrictive covenants. In the period between 1900 and 1920, Los Angeles experienced a boom in housing development during which racially restrictive covenants became widespread. By 1939, almost 47% of Los Angeles County residential neighborhoods included racially restrictive covenants. Restricting people of color from many neighborhoods across Los Angeles resulted in the formation of multiracial neighborhoods. These neighborhoods were notably poor and composed of blacks, Latinos, Asian Americans, Jews, and Italians. Among multiracial neighborhoods in Los Angeles are Boyle Heights, Watts, Belvedere, and South Los Angeles. In the 1930s, Okies from the
filling their coffers to the brim with industrial funds culled from the Midwest's factories.
Al Capone may have ruled over Chicago. Lucky Luciano may have controlled nearly all of New York. But when it came to Harlem, there was only one name that mattered: Bumpy Johnson. You might not be familiar with his name, yet he was one of the most influential gangsters in American underworld history. From 1930s to the 1960s, he was considered the godfather of Harlem, a neighborhood in northern Manhattan where he held absolute control. Want to run an illegal gambling operation? You had to go through Bumpy. Want to open a speakeasy? You had to go through Bumpy. Want to do anything illegal in Harlem? You had to go through Bumpy. Even Frank Lucas, the notorious drug trafficker played by Denzel Washington in American Gangster, was one of his right-hand men. He once said,
"If you wanted to do business in Harlem, you did it with Bumpy Johnson, or you were dead."
Whenever the police or politicians needed something, they turned to him. Even the mafia had to go through Bumpy to conduct business in Harlem. No other African-American gangster of that era had ever achieved such power and influence. At a time when racial discrimination was deeply ingrained, black men had to fight through obstacles just to claim a piece of the American dream, even in the criminal underworld. Bumpy Johnson was the exception to the rule. But before becoming the godfather of Harlem, he, like many others, started at the very bottom. Here is his story. You know, back in the day, if you wanted to stay safe, you had to watch your back. Make sure no one was following you. Keep your business quiet. Today, the real threats aren't in the streets. They're online. Hackers, data brokers, people looking to snatch your personal info without you realizing it. That's why I've been using CyberGhost VPN, who also happens to be the sponsor of today's video. It's honestly one of the easiest ways to stay protected. It encrypts your internet traffic, hides your IP, and makes sure no one can track what you're doing. No sketchy websites, no data leaks, just peace of mind. And on top of that, you can access content from anywhere in the world. There's nothing more annoying than trying to watch something and seeing that stupid, "This content is not available in your country" message. With CyberGhost, you just switch your location, and it's like you're there. And it works on 40 streaming platforms like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and more. So you can get 40% more content in your streaming library. And that's simple. I wouldn't recommend it if I didn't actually use it myself. Over 38 million people trust CyberGhost, and it's one of the highest rated VPNs out there. You can use it on 7 devices, so I've got it on my phone, laptop, even my TV, and you can even share with family and friends. Right now, they've got a crazy deal, $2.03 a month, plus 4 extra months free. And if you don't like it, there's a 45-day money-back guarantee, no questions asked. So yeah, if you're online, you need a VPN. Hit the link in the description and stay protected. Bumpy, whose real name was Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, was born on October 31st, 1905, in Charleston, South Carolina. During this time in the United States, racial segregation was still in effect, so his family settled in the city's black neighborhood. The Johnsons were a modest family, respected in their community. They were also very religious and attended church regularly. His father, William, worked as a fisherman, while his mother, Margaret, worked as a domestic servant. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson had 8 children: Margie, Priscilla, Pauline, Willie, Mabel, Lena, Elise, and finally, Ellsworth, nicknamed Bumpy, a name he would keep for life due to a bump on the back of his skull. Around the age of 1 or 2, Bumpy spent the entire year living with his father and brother Willie. The reason for this was that his mother had 2 jobs, one in Charleston, where the Johnson family lived, and another in New York. There, she took her 3 eldest daughters, Pauline, Mabel, and Lena, with her to help her work as a domestic servant. Although she would return to Charleston once her seasonal work in New York was over, her absence from the family home created a void in young Bumpy's life. He sought a maternal figure in one of his older sisters. At school, he was said to be incredibly intelligent and talkative, so much so that he had skipped 2 grades at the public school in Charleston. Ironically, he would never finish high school, a source of shame for Bumpy, who had been raised in a family that greatly valued education. As a result, he didn't hesitate to lie, claiming that he had attended a prestigious school in Charleston, where the wealthiest black families sent their children, or that he had attended a prestigious university in New York. However, he was so clever and charming that no one ever questioned him when he claimed to have a college education. Bumpy also had a rebellious side and was always very sensitive to the racial injustices faced by black people in the segregated South. In fact, his family found itself in turmoil due to these racial discriminations when he turned 10 years old. At that time, Willie, his 19-year-old brother, was accused of killing a white man in South Carolina, an area known for taking matters into their own hands when a black person committed an offense against a white person. The horrific lynching of Kit Bookard in 1904 in Berkeley County, located about 60 kilometers from the Johnson family home, served as a perfect example. Kit Bookard, a 21-year-old black man, went fishing one day with 6 white men. But on the way back, a dispute broke out between Bookard and one of the men. Bookard threatened to strike him, apparently because the man had struck his younger sister, and he wanted revenge. However, revenge was something he could not fulfill. When they returned to town, he was arrested because of the quarrel and forced to pay a $5 fine. The problem was, he didn't have the money to pay it. He was then thrown into prison, but while there, a group of white men demanded he be handed over, and that's when everything escalated. They took him to the edge of a river and tortured him. They scalped him, gouged out his eyes, cut off his genitals and tongue, then tied him to a grate and threw him into the river to drown. None of the people responsible for this crime were ever brought to justice. So when Willie, Bumpy's older brother, returned home and told his family that he was accused of killing a white man, the Johnsons panicked. They wanted to save their son from a possible lynching, so they quickly got him out of town and sent him to New York, where Margie and Pauline were already living. Bumpy joined them later in 1919. His father had arranged for him to be sent to his older sister Mabel, who lived in Harlem, hoping to give him the opportunity for a better life. At that time, Bumpy was 14 years old and was rather small for his age. A small size he made up for with his tough guy attitude. But sometimes that wasn't enough, and Bumpy became the target of the bullies in his neighborhood. One such altercation happened on his first day at school in Harlem. He was only 2 blocks away from his school when he crossed paths with 6 other teenagers standing on the street corner, throwing dice against a building. He slowed down and took a glance, and just as he was about to walk away, he heard one of the boys call out to him and felt someone grab his arm.
Hey you, country, what you got in your pocket? My hand? Why? You got a problem with that? Oh, country boy got some mouth on him,
said one of the bullies named Junie with a laugh.
Well, take your hand out your pocket and let me see what else is in there,
said another boy, nicknamed 6 and 8, as he stepped closer.
Man, you don't want me to take my hand out of my pocket, because if I do, I'm going to smash it against your head.
Meanwhile, the other boys were betting on who would win the fight between 6 and Bumpy. Finley bet on 6, while another boy named Nat placed his money on Bumpy. It was 6 who threw the first punch. He aimed for Bumpy's chin, but missed. Bumpy, being smaller and faster, easily dodged it, causing his opponent to lose his balance. Then, Bumpy pulled his hand out of his pocket, and as promised, 6 was going to regret it. His fist landed squarely in the middle of 6's face, breaking his nose. 6 fell to his knees as blood sprayed everywhere. Bumpy's second punch hit 6 in the side, weakening him even more. Yet 6 was still not down. He clung to Bumpy's pants, trying to push himself back up. But Bumpy struck again, and this time, when he hit him, coins fell from his fist and scattered on the ground. Finley, who had bet on 6, saw the cheating and shouted,
That's not fair, he's fighting dirty.
On his side, Bumpy kept landing punch after punch on his opponent. He finally managed to make 6 release his grip on his pants and knocked him down with a violent kick between the legs. However, it seemed that Bumpy wasn't finished yet, as at that moment, he was preparing to deliver another kick to 6's head. But before he could do so, a hand grabbed the back of his collar, and he was thrown against a car.
Okay, little nigga, you done won me my money already, but I can't let you kill my boy here,
said Nat.
Fuck you,
replied Bumpy, now ready to fight Nat. Nat smiled and responded, gradually backing away from Bumpy.
I ain't fighting you, man. Like I said, you done won me my money, and you better be glad there was money riding on this fight, else we all would've jumped your ass.
This time, it was Bumpy's turn to smile.
And I would've kicked all your asses, and I still will.
After that, Bumpy, Nat, Finley, and Junie became close friends, an enduring friendship that would last until the end of their lives. Following this encounter, Bumpy never set foot in school again. Every morning, he would leave his sister Mabel's apartment to meet his new friends. They would go out to try to make money playing pool, shooting craps, or selling newspapers. They soon started sweeping the sidewalks in front of certain businesses in Harlem, and they earned even more money. Bumpy was clearly the brains of the gang, and it didn't take him long to realize that he and his friends could make even more by offering their protection to some of the new stores in the neighborhood. And it was through this that he met Bub Hewlett. Bub Hewlett was one of those fearless thugs in Harlem who never walked around without a knife, a baseball bat, or a gun in hand. They would use any excuse to pull out their weapons, whether it was against the police or Irish gangsters who dared set foot on their turf. Of all these criminals, Bub was the most violent. Standing at 6'1" with an imposing build, he was the kind of guy you didn't want to mess with. Bub made his living by extorting money from local businesses in exchange for protection from local thugs. One day, he and Bumpy met. When Bub heard about the opening of the grocery store on 7th Avenue, he went there to offer his protection services. But to his surprise, the store owner told him he had already paid for protection and pointed to Bumpy, who was leaning against Bub's black Lincoln, arms crossed, glaring at him through the store's window.
That little...
Bub said, laughing at the store owner. At the time, Bumpy was 16 years old, about to face a gangster almost twice his age, who was also a good 10 centimeters taller than him.
Get up off my car, little... You know who I am? Yeah, I know. You're Bub Hewlett. Now I'm off your car, so get off my block. Your block? How the hell is this your block? 'Cause me and my boys claimed it. At least we claim in this store.
At that moment, Bub could have easily knocked young Bumpy out with a single punch, but he admired the kid's guts, so he offered to partner up. And that's how Bumpy began his rise in the Harlem underworld. By now, Bumpy hadn't been to school for several months. His sister Mabel was worried and insisted every day that he go back. But seeing all the money he was bringing home, she started to leave him alone more and more. In the 1920s, Bumpy and his crew made their living through all sorts of rackets, as well as burglaries. They no longer just protected grocery store or restaurant owners. They expanded their protection services to club and speakeasy owners as well. During this time, Bub Hewlett, who had developed a fondness for Bumpy, suggested that he and his crew diversify by offering protection to owners of illegal lotteries in Harlem. Some of these owners were among the richest in the neighborhood, earning several $1,000s a week, all tax-free. These people didn't hesitate when it came to protecting their money. They were willing to pay for the toughest bodyguards in town. Bumpy seized the opportunity to make even more money. From then on, he quickly became one of the best in this field, to the point where he was one of the most sought-after bodyguards in Harlem. His reputation grew day by day, and it was about to take off thanks to someone known at the time as the Queen of the Illegal Lottery, none other than Stephanie St. Clair. Stephanie St. Clair was a French-born gang leader in Harlem. She operated in the gambling business and by the 1920s had built a vast criminal empire in the neighborhood. She hired Bumpy to protect one of her many illegal lotteries. Impressed by his protection skills, she made him her personal bodyguard. Bumpy would escort her when she went to see plays, and a quick friendship developed between the two. Bumpy admired St. Clair's class, but also the fact that she was always ready to fight to protect what was hers. This came to light in the 1930s when the Mafia tried to take a slice of the illegal gambling business in Harlem. The underground lottery made a lot of money in that part of New York, so it was natural for the mafia to want to get involved. Dutch Schultz, a gangster linked to New York's 5 families, took charge of the operation. Schultz operated in the Bronx and had made a fortune through alcohol smuggling during Prohibition. In 1933, with Prohibition repealed, he was forced to find new sources of income. To expand his empire, he turned to a very profitable business, the illegal lottery in Harlem. We're in the middle of the Great Depression, and at the time, an illegal gambling game had become widespread in Harlem, the numbers game. The numbers game was like a lottery for the poor. The gambler had to pick 3 numbers, and if the numbers were drawn the next day, they won a prize based on their bet. To participate in the numbers game, all you needed to do was bet $1 with the hope of winning $600. The temptation to play was immense for the people of Harlem, who usually earned only $10 to $15 a week. By the early 1930s, this business was generating more than $50 million annually, an enormous amount, especially considering the economic hardship the country was facing. Some of the lottery owners were making more money than the President of the United States, which was a clear indication of the scale of the operation. It didn't take long for Dutch Schultz to learn about this opportunity. His goal was to grab a slice of the pie, and when you knew the man, you understood that this threat had to be taken seriously. Schultz was a paranoid man. He could kill for pleasure and answered everything with violence. On one occasion, he and his men had beaten a man almost to death, tied him up, and blindfolded him with a piece of clothing infected with a sexually transmitted disease, rendering him blind. St. Clair clearly had reason to be worried. Schultz had started sending his men to Harlem to tell the lottery owners that he was ready to join their operations. In exchange, he promised they wouldn't have problems with the police and offered protection, particularly against kidnapping, a threat which, in reality, was perpetrated by his own men. From there, he managed to establish himself in Harlem's gambling business, and his empire grew significantly, something that didn't sit well with St. Clair. A war between the 2 factions was now inevitable. Bumpy, on the other hand, was still under St. Clair's command. In the 1920s, he had been arrested several times. He was sent to prison for burglary, serving 2 years out of a 10-year sentence. Then, in 1927, he was sentenced to another 2 years for assault. Not long after his release, he was sent back again for theft. But it was after serving this last sentence that things really started to get serious for him. By the end of 1931, Bumpy was released from prison after serving 2.5 years. During his absence, Stephanie St. Clair had received a visit from Bub Hewlett, who now worked for Schultz. Bub tried to convince St. Clair to join their organization, which by then had taken control of most of Harlem's lottery operations. This proposition infuriated her. The pressure on her crew was only growing stronger. Ever since her conflict with Schultz, she and her men had been the target of drive-by shootings. Her employees were being brutally beaten, and some were even threatened with the worst if they dared to keep working for her. Despite all these troubles, St. Clair had managed to keep her gambling empire alive, though on a smaller scale. Many of her men remained fiercely loyal to the Queen of Harlem. She knew how to inspire them and would say things like,
"What kind of men would desert a lady in a fight?"
However, many couldn't withstand the immense pressure from Schultz and his men. They had tried to hold out for as long as possible, but the relentless threats eventually broke their will to keep working for St. Clair. She was cornered, but she still had one last hope. She knew that someone she trusted would soon return to Harlem. Someone who was always ready to fight, especially when a white man tried to take something from black people. Bumpy was about to make his comeback. It had only been 2 days since Bumpy was released from prison. At 25 years old, he was back on the streets of Harlem. That's when he ran into Bub Hewlett at a bar. Bub patted him on the shoulder.
I see you made it home. Welcome back. How'd they treat you up there? How you think? Like shit? Well, you got it right.
Both of them laughed, but what was at stake was anything but funny. Everyone in Harlem knew that Bub worked for Schultz and that he would try to convince Bumpy to join them. At the same time, everyone also knew that St. Clair wanted Bumpy as her ally in this war. People were left wondering which side Bumpy would choose. Bub went on, telling Bumpy that he had a job for him.
Yeah? What? Same thing you was doing before you left the streets. Just keeping folks in line, making sure they do what they're supposed to do. And what they ain't supposed to be doing is writing numbers for anyone but that Jew guy. Schultz, huh?
Bub then looked at him in surprise.
So you heard, huh? Yeah, I heard while I was in the joint. They say the Jew guy been taking over the numbers in Harlem. Said he's hired a bunch of treacherous colors to beat up other colors. You heard anything about that? You grown now, because it seems like you smelling yourself. You so grown you think you gonna try me? Nah, I ain't gonna try you, but I'm not expecting you to try me either. I ain't in this shit, and I don't see any reason to get in it. Good to hear, at least not right now. What's that supposed to mean? It means I only been out 2 days, so I gotta get the lay of the land again, see what I'm gonna be doing. You work for Dutch, and I can guarantee you $200 a week. I heard you getting paid $300. Oh, so now you think you should be getting what I get. I told you that you're smelling yourself. But you's a good man. Let me talk to Schultz and see what he says. I'm sure we can work something out. Nah, don't do that. I can't ever see myself siding with the white man over the black man. You do what you gotta do, and I'll see what I'm gonna be doing. Fair enough.
Then the two shook hands and parted ways. Later that night, Bumpy went to see Stephanie St. Clair.
I want to take care of the damn Dutchman. Run him out of Harlem and back to the damn Bronx, where he belongs. Or better yet, kill him and put him out of his misery.
But Queenie.
No, but Queenie. I want you to kill him or I kill him myself.
Queenie, you know I'm not scared. But what you talking about is all-out war. Who's gonna finance your war?
You think me got no money? I got plenty of money.
Well, it's gonna take a lot more than just plenty of money. Figure you're gonna have to pay at least $200 a week for each good man. And even if you only have 10, which really ain't near enough, that's $2,000 a week. In addition to the men you gotta buy, guns, and pay off the cops, put up bails. And this is not gonna be a matter of days or weeks. This is gonna take months, maybe years. Hell, you think you've got enough money to last that long? Especially with your spots being hit every other day?
Finally, Bumpy and St. Clair organized a meeting with dozens of African-American figures from Harlem's gambling scene. Most of them expressed doubts about the Bumpy-St. Clair alliance winning. Many were afraid, not just of losing money, but of losing their lives due to Schultz's looming threat. However, some chose to stand by their side, and that marked the true beginning of the war between Schultz and St. Clair. In this war, Bumpy had the unwavering support of his old friends, Nat, Finley, and Junie. One day, while out with them, he spotted Bub Hewlett on the other side of the street.
Y'all stay here, but in plain sight. Hey, Bub. Hey, I've been looking for you.
Bub responded suspiciously, one hand tucked into his pocket. That's when Nat noticed Bub's hidden hand.
Bumpy, you all right, man?
Bumpy signaled to him that everything was fine, all while keeping an eye on Bub, whose hand remained inside his pocket.
I told you I'd let you know what I was gonna be doing, remember? And I'm working for Queenie. Man, you're making the wrong move. The Queen's going down. The writing is on the wall. Yeah? You know that means you're going up against me and my men. I know. This shit's gonna get interesting. Guess I'll be seeing you around, Bumpy. Yeah, man, but I'm banking on seeing you first.
Bub and Bumpy burst into laughter once again before parting ways. Once back in the car, Bumpy turned to his friends and said,
I feel like the President of the United States. I just declared war, and you guys are my army. Now we gotta come up with the battle plan.
The first thing Bumpy and his men had to do was find weapons. For this, they could rely on Finley. Junie, on the other hand, was the second brain of the group, the ideal person to carry out Bumpy's plans. Bumpy, therefore, was the planner, and Nat was in charge of the paybacks, a ruthless type who would stop at nothing. With his gang of 9 men, Bumpy went after Schultz's soldiers. They were vastly outnumbered, so their only option was to adopt a guerrilla strategy in the hopes of prevailing. And it must be said, they did very well. Unlike Schultz's men, Bumpy and his crew blended in effortlessly as African Americans in Harlem, which gave them a huge advantage. However, facing Bub Hewlett's crew was a different story. Bub had a deep grudge against Bumpy, and the feeling was mutual. The two factions clashed repeatedly, but neither managed to gain the upper hand. The Bumpy vs. Bub duel finally ended in April 1933, 6 months after the war started, when Bub, in a matter unrelated to the conflict between Schultz and St. Clair, was sentenced to serve a prison term of 2 to 5 years. After his incarceration, most of Bub's men abandoned the battle against Bumpy, except for a few diehards, like Ulysses Rawlins. Ulysses Rawlins had replaced Bub as Schultz's main enforcer in Harlem. In 1934, his intentions were clear. He wanted to take down Bumpy. Upon hearing this news, Bumpy laughed, though he didn't underestimate his new adversary, who had a reputation for being a dangerous man. Moreover, Schultz rarely set foot in Harlem, which frustrated Bumpy, because he had never had the chance to reach him. Schultz always traveled with multiple bodyguards, which made the task even more difficult. But Bumpy still had one card to play. This card involved contacting someone who personally knew Schultz, the boss of the New York Mafia, Lucky Luciano. Bumpy reached out to Luciano at the end of 1934 to discuss the ongoing war in Harlem, which was resulting in more and more deaths. Luciano, of course, was aware of what was happening in that part of New York. He listened carefully to Bumpy, but then told him that he couldn't get involved. He added that if he ever decided to stick his nose in, he would lay down his terms, namely to take over the gambling business in Harlem and add Bumpy to his list of employees for about $1,000 per week. Bumpy was clearly disappointed by his response. He then warned Luciano that if he tried to target the illegal lottery operators in Harlem, he would have no choice but to go after him personally. This made Luciano laugh, and he told Bumpy that he had no chance of winning a war against him, to which Bumpy smiled and responded,
That's the same thing Schultz said, and here I am, 3 years later, speaking with you.
Although impressed by Bumpy's audacity, Luciano remained firm in his stance, and the two men left it at that, at least for the moment. Meanwhile, the war in Harlem continued to rage. It was during the summer of 1935 that Bumpy and Rawlins first clashed. It happened when Bumpy was taking a girl out to dinner. The two were walking calmly when Bumpy saw Rawlins pull out a knife and charge at him. The two men rolled on the ground, fought for a while, and then Bumpy got up and adjusted his tie. He had severely slashed Rawlins's face and body, who was left lying on the ground. One of his eyeballs was hanging by the ligaments, practically out of its socket. After the altercation, Bumpy calmly stepped over him and then announced that he suddenly had a craving for spaghetti and meatballs. Rawlins, seriously injured, was taken to the hospital, but true to his reputation as a tough guy, he left the same night, covered in bandages, searching for Bumpy. He found him at a restaurant on 125th Street, and when he spotted him, he didn't hesitate for a second. He drew his weapon and aimed for his head, Fortunately for Bumpy, the bullet only went through his hat and ended up hitting an innocent woman, killing her instantly. Rollins was eventually arrested by a police officer who happened to be in a restaurant that night and received a heavy sentence. One could say Bumpy got lucky. In fact, that day he made a decision. He would never wear hats again. At this time, Bumpy still wanted Schultz dead, a wish that would eventually be granted in October 1935, when Luciano and other members of the American Organized Crime Syndicate decided that Schultz had to be eliminated. Schultz was being relentlessly pursued by the law at that point, and to escape and calm things down, he had decided to kill a prosecutor named Thomas Dewey, a solution that was simply unacceptable to Luciano and his associates. As a result, Dutch Schultz was shot in a restaurant in New Jersey and died in the hospital shortly after. The Bumpy St. Clair clan had won. Harlem was once again free, and the war was finally over. The only question left was how the illegal lotteries would be organized now that Schultz was dead. Would Lucky Luciano sweep everything away, possibly sidelining Bumpy? Bumpy would soon get answers to his questions, as a week after Schultz's death, he had another meeting with Luciano. With Schultz out of the picture, Bumpy and Luciano met again, this time at the request of the Italian mafia boss. Luciano let Bumpy speak first, then the two men discussed several points. Bumpy first stated that he was aware that he couldn't win a war against Luciano, but he certainly couldn't just sit idly by and let the Harlem gambling business slip away from African Americans. After listening to Bumpy, Luciano declared that he was willing to leave all the Harlem gambling operators alone, at least those who had supported him during the war. He then added that any new lottery opening in the neighborhood would now fall under the control of the mafia. After that, Bumpy asked to become Luciano's partner in Harlem, meaning the mafia would not take any action there without his agreement and a share of the business. Bumpy and Luciano then negotiated for hours on these points.
Don't you realize I'm doing you a favor? I could kill you right now and just take over everything.
Smiling, Bumpy replied that he knew Luciano was far too savvy a businessman to do such a thing. The negotiations continued, and the two men eventually laughed together, reaching an agreement. Bumpy had successfully negotiated a peace with honor and had stood his ground against New York's biggest crime boss. An achievement that the people of Harlem would not soon forget, and many would admire him for it. After the meeting with Luciano, everyone wanted to be his friend, do something for him or his associates. Eager to stay in his good graces, drinks were always on the house whenever he entered a bar or club. More and more women flocked to him, and more celebrities even came to introduce themselves. But what Bumpy liked most about his new status was seeing the Italian gangsters respect the deal he had made with Luciano. None of them could meddle with the lotteries owned by Bumpy and his friends, or they would have to confront Bumpy himself. Everything was going smoothly, until the day a problem arose with one of the lottery managers Bumpy was protecting. To resolve the issue, Luciano summoned him one afternoon to his luxurious suite at the Waldorf Astoria.
So, what's been going on uptown?
Nothing new.
Is that so? I hear the money's not been so good lately.
Really? I'm sorry to hear you say that.
Anything I could do to help? We're both businessmen. Let's lay our cards on the table. You got a problem, you come to me, and I straighten it out. I'm the boss. Remember that?
We had a deal. You don't move against any of the independent bankers.
This man you're talking about, he owes us money. The way it's figured, if he owes us, we own him. Understand?
No, I don't understand. If you had a problem with one of my people, then why didn't you come to me? In Harlem, I'm the boss. Remember that.
You? Now you're the boss?
In Harlem, yes. You may control the rest of New York, and I respect that. I would never make a move against one of your friends. I give you that respect.
I recognize that, Bumpy. And you know I'm a man who gives respect. Don't matter to me if they're a Jew, a Mick, or a... We all want to make some money, eh? Live and let live.
Exactly.
The two men then continued their conversation and eventually came to an understanding. Bumpy was about to leave when he noticed a chessboard on a table.
You play, huh?
Yeah. You? Never mind. I should have figured that.
What do you mean?
You're a man who always seems to have his moves planned 2 steps ahead.
So do you.
Me? Nah. I plan 4 or 5 moves ahead.
Bumpy and Luciano sat down at the chessboard and played a few games. Bumpy won the first one, Luciano took the next, and the remaining 2 ended in a draw, which became a tradition every time they played chess together. Thus, a friendly relationship developed between the two men. Their chess games would continue until 1936, when Luciano was sent to prison for forced prostitution. In fact, Bumpy joined him a year later after being arrested for criminal assault. He had attacked a pimp who had beaten one of the girls he was protecting and received a 10-year sentence for it. He was then sent to Dannemora prison, where Luciano was incarcerated. It's even said that Bumpy once saved Lucky in the prison yard by shoving and hitting a man who had tried to stab him. This favor reportedly earned him some good Italian food during his stay. Bumpy was released from Dannemora in 1947, but when he returned to the streets of Harlem, things had changed.
Things ain't like they supposed to be, Bumpy. The Italians got things all tied up now. They might not even let you open a spot. Let me open a spot? Since when I need permission from a grease bar to open a spot? Like I said, things got different. Nowadays, no one opens a spot unless it's sanctioned by the Italians up on the east side.
A few days later, Bumpy went to the east side to meet Joe Adonis, the acting head of Luciano's operations since he had been deported to Italy. Bumpy didn't like Adonis much. He found him vain and pretentious, the type of guy who wouldn't pass a mirror without stopping to fix his hair and admire himself. However, he did recognize some qualities in him. Adonis knew how to handle business, and he was fairly loyal. When they met, he was with Frank Costello, Meyer Lansky, Tommy Lucchese, and Albert Anastasia, the kind of people Luciano trusted to carry out his orders from prison, and later from Italy during his exile. During their meeting, the Italian mobster gave him a welcome gift, a thick envelope with $6,000 and a brand new 1947 black Lincoln Continental.
Nice, but I prefer Cadillacs.
No problem. Take the Lincoln now. I'll replace it with the Cadillac in a couple days.
This is going to come in handy, because I'm going to be swinging back in action in a couple of days.
Yeah? That's nice. What kind of action you talking about?
Same kind of action I was in before I went up. I'm opening up a bank.
You got the okay for that, Bumpy?